Welcome back to another deep dive into the grim darkness of the far future. Tonight, we're exploring one of the most secretive and enigmatic chapters in all of Warhammer 40,000, the Dark Angels, the First Legion, the Unforgiven. These warriors carry a burden that has defined them for over 10,000 years. A shame so profound that it shapes every decision, every battle, every moment of their existence. They are knights in powered armor, hunting ghosts across the galaxy, driven by a quest for redemption that may never end. Before we descend into the shadows of their history, if you enjoy these explorations of the deeper lore of science fiction, hitting that like button and subscribing really helps the channel grow. It lets me know you want more content like this, more journeys into the hidden corners of these vast universes. Now, settle in as we unravel the story of the Dark Angels and their unseen war. The First Legion. In the beginning, there was the First, before any other Space Marine Legion took to the stars, before the Great Crusade truly began its galaxy-spanning march. The Emperor of Mankind created his first transhuman warriors. They weren't yet called the Dark Angels. They were simply known as the Easton Legion, the prototype, the proof of concept that would define what it meant to be Astartes. These early warriors bore the weight of being first, and with that came both privilege and burden. The gene seed that would create the Dark Angels was in production a century before the Unification Wars even ended on Terra. Think about that for a moment. While the Emperor was still unifying humanity's cradle world, while warlords and techno-barbarian kings still contested for dominance, he was already preparing the tools that would carry his vision to the stars. The prototype Space Marines created from this early gene seed, warriors like Abraxas Ghent, served as living templates for everything that would follow. During the final days of the Unification Wars, these first Astartes entered combat. Their debut wasn't against Xenos horrors or rebellious colony worlds. It was right there on Terra, during what history would record as the Palace Coup. These warriors, organized into small, elite formations, fought alongside the Emperor's own forces. They weren't numerous, not yet, but they were devastating. Regular human soldiers who witnessed them in action began calling them the Uncrowned Princes, a title that captured both their nobility and their terrible power. The early Easton Legion organized itself into what they called hosts. These weren't bound by traditional military hierarchy or company structure. Instead, they were specialized formations that existed throughout the Legion, groupings of expertise and tactical doctrine that could be called upon whenever their particular skills were needed. At any given battle, elements of multiple hosts would be present, advising and leading, bringing their accumulated knowledge to bear. In those early records, as many as 18 distinct hosts are noted, each marked by unique heraldry, each representing a different approach to warfare. This organizational philosophy would later be refined by their Primarch into something more structured, but the core idea remained. The Dark Angels would always be a legion of specialists, of warriors who didn't just fight, but who understood warfare as an art with many forms. This early adaptability, this willingness to embrace multiple doctrines simultaneously, gave them an edge that other legions lacked. They could be heavy infantry one moment, rapid strike force the next, siege breakers or void warfare specialists as the situation demanded. As the Unification Wars drew to their close, the Ist Legion ascended in both power and the Emperor's favor. They were the test case that proved the viability of the Space Marine project. Every success they achieved validated the Emperor's vision. Every battle they won demonstrated what these post-human warriors could accomplish. When the tech priests of Mars intervened in Terra's conflicts, hoping to delay the Emperor's final victory, it was these early Astartes who forced them to sue for peace. The stage was set for something greater. With Terra unified and Mars brought into the fold through the Treaty of Olympus, the Imperium of Man was born. The Great Crusade could begin, and leading that charge, at least initially, would be the First Legion. They had been tested in the fires of Terra's unification. They had proven themselves worthy. Now they would take humanity's light to the stars, reclaiming lost worlds and pushing back the darkness that had isolated humanity for thousands of years. But the Ist Legion's primacy wouldn't last forever. The Great Crusade was vast beyond comprehension, a military endeavor that spanned the entire galaxy. Even with accelerated recruitment, even with the gene seed production facilities working at maximum capacity, the First Legion couldn't be everywhere at once. Other legions were created, each eventually reunited with their own Primarch. The competition for glory, the race to claim the most worlds for the Imperium, created tensions that would have profound consequences. And then there were the Rangdan Xenocides. These campaigns, fought primarily by the Dark Angels in the middle years of the Great Crusade, were apocalyptic in scope. The Rangdan were a threat so severe, so existentially dangerous, that they required extermination at any cost. The Dark Angels led these wars, and they paid in blood. Whole portions of the Legion were lost. Their numbers, once the greatest of all the legions, were depleted drastically. The scars of those battles changed them in ways both visible and hidden. It was into this context that their Primarch finally arrived. The Ist Legion had fought for decades without him, had carved out their own identity and traditions. They had become something unique, shaped by the Emperor himself and by the trials of endless war. When Lion L. Johnson finally took command, he would find a legion that was simultaneously his to command and already fully formed. The meeting between Primarch and Legion would be transformative, but it wouldn't erase what the Dark Angels had become in his absence. The Lion of Caliban. The story of Lion L. Johnson begins, as all Primarch stories do, with catastrophe. The infant demigods that the Emperor had created in his gene laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains were stolen by the Chaos Gods, scattered across the galaxy through warp rifts that defied understanding. Each Primarch landed on a different world, and each was shaped by their upbringing in ways their father could never have anticipated. For the infant who would become known as the Lion, fate chose a world of monsters and darkness. Caliban was a death world, classified officially, but understood intimately by its inhabitants to be a place where survival was never guaranteed. The planet was covered in dense primordial forests that seemed to go on forever. Ancient woodlands where light barely penetrated the canopy, and in those forests lived the great beasts, creatures that defied easy categorization. They were massive, terrible, shaped by the warp taint that seeped from Caliban's proximity to what would later be known as the Eye of Terror. These weren't mere predators. They were nightmares made flesh, capable of devastating entire settlements in a single night. Human civilization on Caliban clustered in fortified keeps and castles, islands of light in an ocean of darkness. The people lived under constant siege, never knowing when the forests might disgorge another horror. To protect them stood the knightly orders, warriors trained from youth in combat, bound by codes of honor and duty. They rode out into the forests on great steeds, seeking to push back the darkness, to make the world safe for those who depended on them. It was a feudal society, medieval in structure, built on necessity rather than choice. The infant Primarch's pod crashed in the deepest, most dangerous part of these forests, far from any human settlement. By all logic, he should have died within moments. Even a space marine in full battle plate might hesitate to venture into those depths alone. But the Primarch survived. More than survived. He thrived. For 10 years, the young lion lived in those forests, entirely alone, surrounded by the deadliest creatures known to Caliban's people. He learned to hunt them. He learned to kill them. He became something the great beasts themselves feared. When a group of knights from the Order, one of Caliban's most prestigious knightly organizations, encountered him, they found not a feral child, but something that defied understanding. The Lion, as they would come to call him, was a young man who moved through the forests with perfect confidence, who fought with a skill that seemed impossible. One knight in particular, Luther, saw something in this strange forest-born warrior. While the others prepared to strike down what they assumed was touched by the warp's corruption, Luther stayed their hands. He sensed potential. He saw not a threat, but a brother. Luther brought the young Primarch back to the Order's fortress. There the lion learned to speak, to read, to understand human culture and society. His progress was extraordinary. Within months, he had absorbed knowledge that should have taken years to acquire. His combat abilities, already formidable, became legendary. When the Order rode out against the great beasts, it was often the lion who struck the killing blow. who found the weak points in creatures that had terrorized Caliban for generations. The relationship between Luther and the lion became the stuff of legend on Caliban. They were brothers in arms, partners in every sense. Luther had been Caliban's greatest hero before the lion's arrival. Now, together, they achieved things that had seemed impossible. They pushed deeper into the forests than anyone had dared. They slew beasts that were spoken of in terrified whispers. Slowly but surely, they began to turn the tide against the darkness that had oppressed Caliban for so long. It was the lion who conceived of the grand strategy that would finally break the great beast's hold on the planet. Rather than merely defending settlements or launching limited raids, they would conduct a systematic campaign of extermination. Hunt down every great beast, purge them from Caliban entirely, reclaim the world for humanity. It was ambitious to the point of madness, but under the lion's leadership, it worked. For the first time in living memory, the forests began to grow quiet. Settlements could expand. People could breathe without constant fear. In recognition of this triumph, the lion was proclaimed supreme Grand Master of the Order. At a relatively young age, by Caliban's standards, he had achieved the highest honor their society could bestow. Luther stood beside him throughout, serving as second in command, as he always had. But there, in that moment of triumph, something subtle shifted. Luther had been Caliban's champion, its greatest warrior and hero. Now, despite all his achievements, he stood in the shadow of someone greater. The seed of jealousy, so small it might have been dismissed, took root in Luther's heart. Then the Emperor came to Caliban, the master of mankind himself, accompanied by his fleet and armies, descended upon this feudal world on the galaxy's edge. He had been searching for his lost sons, following trails and prophecies and the subtle currents of fate. When he met the lion, there was instant recognition. Father and son, separated by the machinations of chaos, reunited at last. The Emperor revealed the truth to the lion. He was not a strange gift of the forests or some aberration. He was a Primarch, one of 20 demigods created to lead humanity's conquest of the galaxy. Out there, among the stars, was a legion of warriors who carried his gene seed, who waited for their father to take command. The Ist Legion, the first, the Dark Angels as they would be renamed, needed him. For the lion, this revelation must have been staggering. In a single moment, the scope of his existence expanded from a single planet to an entire galaxy. His purpose, which he had thought was to protect Caliban and its people, was actually far grander. He was meant to lead armies of transhuman warriors in a crusade that would unite all of humanity under one banner. Everything he had been, everything he had accomplished on Caliban, was merely preparation for this greater destiny. The transition was swift. Caliban was brought into Imperial compliance, its feudal structure modified to fit the Imperium's needs, but largely left intact. The Order's knights, those young enough to survive the process, were implanted with the Dark Angel's gene seed, becoming full Astartes. Those too old for traditional Space Marine creation, including Luther, underwent different procedures. They received genetic and cybernetic augmentations that granted them abilities beyond normal humans, though they could never truly become Space Marines. They would serve as an intermediate tier, enhanced warriors who could fight alongside their fully transformed brothers. Luther became the Lion's second-in-command, just as he had been in the Order. It seemed natural, inevitable even. They had fought together for years. Luther knew the Lion better than anyone, but already that seed of jealousy was growing. And when the Lion departed Caliban to take command of his legion and join the Great Crusade, leaving Luther behind to oversee the planet and train new recruits, the resentment began to fester in earnest. Understanding what happened to the Dark Angels requires understanding Luther's descent from hero to traitor. This wasn't a simple corruption by chaos, though the dark gods certainly played their part. It was something more complex, more tragic. It was the slow erosion of a good man's soul, ground down by jealousy, perceived slights, and the whispers of those who promised him the recognition he felt he deserved. When the Lion departed Caliban to join the Great Crusade, he left behind a significant portion of the Dark Angels. Luther commanded them, along with many of the Calibanite knights who had been transformed into Space Marines. On the surface, this was a position of great responsibility. Caliban would serve as the Legion's primary recruiting world, and Luther would oversee the training of new generations of Dark Angels. He would transform raw recruits into warriors worthy of the First Legion. It was vital work. But Luther didn't see it that way. From his perspective, he had been exiled. While the Lion and the rest of the Legion won glory among the stars, conquering worlds and facing the galaxy's greatest threats, Luther was stuck on a backwater planet, playing training officer. News reached Caliban of the Lion's great deeds, of battles won and enemies defeated. The Lion's fame spread throughout the galaxy. He was spoken of as one of the Emperor's finest generals, a Primarch whose tactical genius was matched by few of his brothers. And where was Luther in these tales? Nowhere. He was forgotten. A footnote. The man who had once been Caliban's greatest champion, reduced to administrative duties. The jealousy that had sprouted when the Lion became Supreme Grand Master of the Order grew into something darker. Luther began to reinterpret the past through this lens of resentment. Had he really saved the Lion from the knights who would have killed him? Or had the Lion manipulated him from the start? Was the Lion's rise to leadership earned, or had he simply overshadowed Luther through genetic advantages that had nothing to do with merit? The situation on Caliban grew more complicated. Imperial compliance meant change, and not everyone welcomed it. The planet's nobility, accustomed to their feudal privileges, found their traditional powers curtailed. Peasants who had once worked their lands were conscripted or taxed by the Imperium's tithe collectors. There were grumblings of discontent, whispers of rebellion. Luther found himself having to enforce policies he wasn't sure he agreed with, suppressing his own people on behalf of an Imperium that seemed to have discarded him. Then came the discovery of Caliban's warp taint, the planet's proximity to what would become the Eye of Terror, combined with the nature of the great beasts that had once plagued it, meant that chaos had touched Caliban more deeply than anyone realized. A cabal of chaos sorcerers had infiltrated the world, working to destabilize it from within. When this was discovered, Luther became paranoid. The Emperor, he reasoned, would see Caliban as corrupted, tainted. The entire planet might be destroyed as a precaution. And had the Lion known about this? Had he left Luther here specifically so that when the truth came out, Luther would be destroyed along with the planet? These thoughts, poisonous and unfounded, took root. Luther's mental state deteriorated further. A rebellion did break out on Caliban, led by disgruntled nobles and influenced by chaos cultists. In fighting to suppress it, Luther and his dark angels discovered that some of the tactics they were being forced to use were themselves tainted by the warp. They began employing chaos-influenced powers to combat chaos-influenced rebels. The line between protector and corrupted became increasingly blurred. Meanwhile, Luther received another blow. He learned that a cult of Terran dark angels stationed on Caliban had been conducting demonic rituals. The threat was narrowly stopped by Zahariel, a librarian whom Luther had grown fond of, but the incident revealed how deeply chaos had penetrated even the Legion itself. If corruption ran so deep, if even the Emperor's own space marines could fall to darkness, what did that say about the Imperium they were fighting for?
The Great Crusade continued without pause. The Lion and the main body of the Dark Angels fought across the galaxy, and with each passing year, the gulf between them and the garrison on Caliban grew wider. The warriors Luther commanded began to share his resentment. They felt abandoned, left behind while their brothers earned glory. The Calabanite Dark Angels in particular felt this keenly. They had been the first to join the Legion from their homeworld, had fought just as hard as anyone, but were relegated to garrison duty. Then came the Horus Heresy. Half of the Emperor's Primarch sons turned traitor, led by War Master Horus himself. The galaxy burned. Legions that had once been brothers now slaughtered each other. And in all of this, no word came from the Lion about Caliban's status or role. The heresy raged, and Luther and his Dark Angels sat on their homeworld, uncertain of what was happening, feeling more isolated and forgotten than ever. Luther made his decision during this period. He would not serve an Imperium that treated him this way. He would not bow to a Lion who had cast him aside. The Dark Angels' garrison on Caliban would become independent, would chart their own course. And if that meant embracing the powers that whispered promises of vindication and revenge, so be it. Chaos had been seducing Luther for years. Now, finally, he stopped resisting. Not all of the Dark Angels on Caliban agreed with this path. Some remained loyal to the Lion, to the Emperor, to the oaths they had sworn. But Luther's oratory skills, which had once inspired men to fight for Caliban's freedom from the great beasts, now turned them toward darker purposes. He spoke of betrayal and abandonment, of how the lion had deliberately kept them from the glory they deserved. He painted a picture of themselves as the wronged, the forgotten, who had every right to claim what had been denied to them. When the Horus heresy finally ended, when the traitor legions were defeated and fled to the Eye of Terror, the lion turned his fleet toward home. He thought of Caliban as a place of rest, a haven where the Legion could recover from the terrible wars they had fought. He looked forward to seeing Luther again, to reuniting with the brother who had been by his side during Caliban's liberation. The lion had no idea what awaited him. The fall of Caliban. The Dark Angel's fleet dropped out of the warp at Caliban's edge, expecting to find a welcome. Instead, they found orbital defense weapons tracking their approach. For a moment, there must have been confusion. Surely this was a mistake, some mix-up in recognition protocols. But then the weapons opened fire. Lance batteries designed to defend against invasion fleets turned on the Legion's own ships. Vessels exploded. Thousands of Dark Angels died in the first moments, incinerated by weapons meant to protect them. The lion pulled his fleet back, trying to understand what was happening. A nearby merchant vessel provided the answer,
though the news it carried was almost incomprehensible. Luther, the lion's second-in-command, his oldest friend and brother, had ordered the attack. The Dark Angel's garrison on Caliban had turned traitor. The lion's fury was immediate and absolute. If Luther had betrayed him, if the Dark Angels on Caliban had fallen to chaos as the merchant ship's reports suggested, then there could be only one response. He ordered a sustained orbital bombardment of the planet's surface. The fleet's guns, weapons designed to crack continents and boil oceans, turned on Caliban itself. This world that the lion had fought to save, that he had freed from the great beasts, now burned under fire from its own protectors. The lion himself led an assault directly toward Luther's position. He would not delegate this. If Luther wanted a confrontation, the Primarch would give him one. The teleportation systems of the fleet activated, sending the lion and his most elite warriors directly into Caliban's fortress monastery, into the heart of Luther's power. Father and son, once in all but blood, would face each other in battle. The destruction raining from orbit was horrific. Caliban's surface cracked under the sustained bombardment. Tectonic plates shifted. Magma welled up from the planet's core. The forests that had once been filled with great beasts now burned in atomic fire. Entire regions simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the weapons of the Dark Angel's fleet. The world was being killed, torn apart by its own sons. In the fortress monastery, the lion and Luther fought. Two warriors who had trained together, who knew each other's fighting style intimately, now turned that knowledge toward lethal purpose. The lion was a Primarch, transhuman beyond human, with strength and speed that defied mortal comprehension. But Luther had been enhanced by the powers of chaos, granted abilities that let him stand against even a son of the Emperor. They were matched in a way that should have been impossible. The battle raged through the fortress. Walls fell. Architecture that had stood for centuries collapsed around them. The lion sought to end it quickly.
to deliver a killing blow that would finish Luther before more damage could be done. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. This was Luther, his friend, his brother, even corrupted, even turned traitor. Some heart of the lion held back from the final stroke. Luther had no such hesitation. Drawing on powers granted by the Chaos Gods, he unleashed a psychic attack of devastating force. The blast caught the lion square, a lance of warp energy that would have killed a normal space marine instantly. Even a Primarch couldn't shrug off such a wound. The lion fell, mortally wounded, his body failing even as his legendary resilience fought to keep him alive. And in that moment, as Luther stood over his fallen former friend, reality reasserted itself. The madness that had consumed him, the resentment and jealousy and chaos-fueled rage suddenly lifted like a curtain being torn away. Luther saw what he had become, what he had done. He had betrayed everything he once stood for. He had turned on the brother who had trusted him. He had mortally wounded the greatest warrior Caliban had ever produced. The realization shattered his sanity. He fell to his knees beside the dying lion, weeping, no longer willing or able to fight. The Chaos Gods, watching from the warp, realized they had lost. Luther was supposed to complete his betrayal, to finish the lion and claim a great victory for the ruinous powers. Instead, he had broken at the moment of triumph. In their fury and frustration, they lashed out. A warp rift tore open, wider and more violent than any seen since the Horus Heresy's darkest moments. Psychic energy flooded into reality with uncontrollable force. The planet Caliban, already cracking under orbital bombardment, couldn't withstand this new assault. The warp rift's edges touched its surface, and where they made contact, reality simply ended. Chunks of the planet were torn away, flung into the Imperium or scattered across space. The strain was too much. With a cataclysm that could be felt across the sector, Caliban exploded. Those dark angels who had followed Luther, who had embraced his rebellion and the Chaos Gods' promises, were caught in the warp storm. They didn't die. Not exactly. Instead, they were ripped from reality and scattered. Some were flung across space, appearing on distant worlds light years away. Others were thrown through time, emerging decades or even centuries later. Still others were trapped in the warp itself, suspended in that hellish dimension, their ultimate fate unknown. When the storm finally subsided, almost nothing remained of Caliban. The planet that had once been a verdant death world, covered in ancient forests and home to generations of knights, was gone. Only one piece survived intact. The fortress monastery itself, the Tower of Angels, still stood. The void shields that had protected it during the orbital bombardment, combined with ancient technologies and perhaps the will of something watching over the Dark Angels, had preserved this single fragment. It hung in space now, a massive chunk of rock with a fortress built upon it, all that remained of a world.
The surviving Dark Angels searched the ruins. They found Luther, his mind broken, but his body alive. He sat in a cell, babbling about the lion, about forgiveness, about how it wasn't time yet, but soon the lion would return. He offered no resistance when they took him into custody. Didn't seem to fully comprehend what was happening. The madness that had claimed him when he realized what he'd done had never truly lifted. But of the lion himself, there was no sign. The chamber where he had fallen was empty. His body was gone. Had he been taken by the warp storm along with Luther's followers? Had he died and his remains been lost in the destruction? The Dark Angels searched desperately, but found nothing. Their Primarch, their father, had vanished. Only much later would the truth be discovered by a very few. The lion hadn't died. He hadn't been cast into the warp. Instead, the Watchers in the Dark, mysterious beings that had served the Dark Angels since before anyone could remember, had taken him. Deep within the fragment of Caliban that survived, in a chamber known only to them, the lion slept. His wounds were too severe to heal normally, so the Watchers placed him in stasis, maintaining his life, waiting for a time when he could be healed and awakened. But they told no one. Even the Emperor himself wouldn't know the lion's true fate. The Dark Angels were left with ruins and questions. Their homeworld was destroyed. Their Primarch was gone. Half of the Legion's garrison had turned traitor and was now scattered across the galaxy. And the Imperium, still reeling from the Horus heresy, would be asking questions. What had happened on Caliban? Why had Dark Angels fought Dark Angels? If some of the First Legion had fallen to chaos, could the rest be trusted? In that moment, facing potential destruction of everything they had built, the surviving leaders of the Dark Angels made a choice that would define their chapter for the next 10,000 years. They would keep the truth secret. No one outside the Dark Angels would ever know about Luther's betrayal, about the Civil War, about the fallen Dark Angels scattered across space and time. The shame was too great, the potential consequences too severe. They would hunt down every one of the fallen, make them repent or kill them, erase every trace of the betrayal, and they would do it in absolute secrecy, no matter what it cost. In the aftermath of Caliban's destruction, with Luther captured and the lion missing, the senior members of the Dark Angels faced an impossible situation. The Horus heresy had just ended, and the Imperium was in chaos. Trust had been shattered. Fully half of the Space Marine legions had betrayed the Emperor and turned to chaos. The hunt for traitors consumed every institution, with inquisitors and accusers seeing sedition in every shadow. If it became known that elements of the Dark Angels had also fallen, that some of the First Legion had turned traitor, the consequences would be catastrophic. the Dark Angels would be declared excommunicate traitorous. They would be hunted and destroyed alongside the traitor legions. It wouldn't matter that the vast majority had remained loyal, that they had fought throughout the heresy on the Emperor's side. The taint of betrayal, once revealed, would doom them all. Everything the Legion had accomplished, all the worlds they had brought into compliance, all the sacrifices of the Great Crusade would be rendered meaningless. The First Legion would be remembered only for falling to chaos. So they made their choice. The truth would be buried. The official record would show nothing of Luther's betrayal or the fallen. As far as the Imperium knew, Caliban had been destroyed during the heresy by warp storms or enemy action, the details lost in the confusion of that terrible time. The lion had disappeared, fate unknown, as had several other Primarchs in the heresy's aftermath. It was tragic, but not suspicious. The Dark Angels were heroes, loyalists who had stood firm while others fell. That was the story. That would always be the story. But maintaining this lie would require an organizational structure unlike anything that had existed before. The senior officers assembled in secret conclave, forming what they named the Inner Circle. This would be the core group who knew the full truth, who understood what had really happened on Caliban, and why the Dark Angels would spend the rest of their existence hunting their fallen brothers. Each member swore oaths of secrecy so binding that breaking them was literally unthinkable. They created systems to watch over their own battle brothers, to monitor for signs of corruption or knowledge of the fallen. The Inner Circle structure was designed around layers of revelation. Not every Dark Angel would know the truth, because the more who knew, the greater the chance of exposure. Instead, knowledge would be granted progressively as a warrior proved his loyalty and dedication beyond all doubt. This created a pyramid of secrecy, with circles within circles, each layer knowing slightly more than the one below it, each bound by increasingly severe oaths. At the bottom were the battle brothers of the standard companies. They knew nothing of the fallen or Luther's betrayal. They were given a sanitized version of the Legion's history, taught that all Dark Angels had remained loyal during the heresy, that Caliban's destruction was a tragedy but not a source of shame. They fought as all Space Marines did, in the Emperor's name, against the Imperium's enemies. They were heroes, and they believed themselves to be serving a chapter with an unblemished record. But even at this level, the Dark Angels were different from other chapters. They were taught to be secretive by nature, to reveal nothing of their methods or thinking to outsiders. They learned that some battles had to be fought without explanation, that orders sometimes came without justification, and a good Dark Angel followed those orders without question. This culture of secrecy started early and ran deep. As a warrior proved himself, as he survived decades or centuries of combat and demonstrated absolute loyalty, he might be promoted to the Death Wing, the chapter's elite first company. This was an honor, certainly, a recognition that he was among the chapter's best, but it was also the first true revelation. Upon induction into the Death Wing, a warrior learned the truth about Luther and the Fallen. He discovered that part of the Legion had turned traitor, that their Primarch had vanished after a battle with his own second-in-command, that scattered across the galaxy
were Dark Angels, who had betrayed everything the chapter stood for.
This revelation was carefully managed. The newly inducted Deathwing member was brought before senior officers, often including interrogator chaplains, and told the story over multiple sessions. The information was presented in a way that made it clear this knowledge was both precious and dangerous. The Dark Angels' honor, their very survival, depended on keeping this secret. Every Fallen who remained alive and unrepentant was a stain on the chapter's honor, a reminder of their shame. The hunt to capture and redeem these traitors was the most important mission the chapter could undertake. The psychological impact of this revelation varied. Some warriors reacted with shock and determination, immediately dedicating themselves to the hunt for the Fallen with renewed vigor. Others went through periods of doubt or confusion. Everything they thought they knew about their chapter's history was wrong. The glorious past they had been taught was partly a lie. But the interrogator chaplains were skilled in their work. They knew how to shape a warrior's reaction, how to channel any negative emotions into productive fury directed at the Fallen. Once a warrior was part of the Deathwing, he began to understand the chapter's strange priorities. Why did Dark Angels strike forces sometimes abandon battles at critical moments? Because intelligence had been received about a Fallen's location, and capturing that traitor took precedence over anything else. Why did the Dark Angels sometimes refuse to coordinate with other Imperial forces or share tactical information? Because they couldn't risk outsiders learning about the hunt. Every decision that seemed inexplicable to other chapters made perfect sense once you understood the underlying truth. But even Deathwing membership didn't grant access to all secrets. There were higher circles still. Senior members of the Deathwing formed an inner council who knew more details about specific Fallen, about the methods used to track them, about the extent of the corruption that had claimed Caliban. Company masters, the officers who commanded the Dark Angels' battle companies, were typically part of this elevated circle. They needed to know more because they made strategic decisions that could impact the hunt. Then there were the interrogator chaplains, who formed their own specialized circle within the inner circle. These warriors were the chapter's spiritual guardians and its most skilled interrogators. They presided over the capture and questioning of Fallen, working in the depths of the rock to break prisoners and extract both information and repentance. Their knowledge was more specific in some ways, focused on individual Fallen, their crimes, their current aliases and activities. An interrogator chaplain might know the location of torture chambers that even some company masters didn't realize existed. The Raven Wing, the chapter's second company, occupied a unique position in this hierarchy. Not all Raven Wing members knew about the Fallen initially. The company served as the Dark Angels' fast attack force, their reconnaissance and pursuit specialists. and many of its members performed these duties without understanding the true target of their hunts. But the Raven Wing's inner circle, particularly the Black Knights and their leadership, knew everything. They were the hunters who tracked Fallen across the galaxy, who gathered intelligence and coordinated the captures that the Deathwing would execute. At the very apex of the inner circle sat the Supreme Grand Master, the chapter's leader, and his closest advisors. These individuals knew everything that could be known. They maintained records of every known Fallen, every suspected location, every ongoing hunt. They coordinated not just the Dark Angels, but the entire Unforgiven, the successor chapters descended from the original Legion, who shared the secret and the shame. The weight of this knowledge was crushing. These warriors carried the burden of 10,000 years of failure, because despite all their efforts, Fallen still existed, still evaded capture, still mocked everything the Dark Angels stood for. The Inner Circle's operations required extensive infrastructure. Deep within the rock, the asteroid fortress that served as the Dark Angels' fortress monastery and mobile headquarters, entire levels existed that appeared on no official maps. These hidden chambers housed interrogation facilities, record archives, communications equipment for coordinating hunts, and meeting rooms where the Inner Circle convened to discuss matters that could never be spoken of elsewhere. Security around these chambers was absolute. Psychic wards prevented telepathic eavesdropping. Servo skulls equipped with sophisticated auspex equipment constantly scanned for unauthorized personnel. Access required multiple levels of authentication, including genetic verification, psychic resonance testing, and in some cases, direct approval from an interrogator chaplain. Even other Dark Angels couldn't enter without proper clearance. If a battle brother from one of the standard companies somehow found his way into these restricted areas, he would be detained immediately and subjected to memory modification or, if necessary, quietly executed. The secret was that important. The Inner Circle also maintained extensive spy networks throughout the Imperium. These weren't formal organizations, but rather carefully cultivated relationships and information sources. A Dark Angel's chaplain might maintain contact with an Inquisitor who could access records sealed to others. A company master might have an understanding with a rogue trader who operated in sectors where Fallen had been spotted. These relationships were managed carefully, never revealing too much, always maintaining the fiction that the Dark Angels were simply thorough in their pursuit of the Imperium's enemies. One of the most challenging aspects of maintaining the Inner Circle was managing the psychological toll on its members. Keeping secrets of this magnitude for decades or centuries created immense stress. The burden of knowing that your chapter's honor hung by a thread, that discovery would mean destruction, weighed heavily. Some warriors grew paranoid, seeing potential security breaches everywhere. Others became so focused on the hunt that they neglected other duties. The interrogator chaplains watched their brothers carefully, intervening when someone showed signs of cracking under the pressure. The relationship between different circles could be complex. A recently inducted Deathwing member might find himself serving under a company master who had been part of the Inner Circle for centuries. The master knew things the younger warrior didn't, secrets within secrets, but he couldn't simply explain everything. The Deathwing member would learn more in time as he proved himself further.
But for now, he had to trust that his superiors' decisions were based on knowledge he didn't yet possess. This created a culture where questioning orders was not just discouraged, but seen as a potential sign of corruption or disloyalty. Outsiders who interacted with the Dark Angels often sensed something was off without being able to articulate exactly what. The chapter seemed more closed than others, less willing to share information or coordinate operations. They had a tendency to suddenly break off engagements for no apparent reason, leaving allies unsupported. They maintained excessive operational security, even by Space Marine standards. But without evidence of actual heresy or betrayal, there was little anyone could do. The Dark Angels were too powerful, too respected, too necessary to the Imperium's defense to be challenged based on vague suspicions. The Inner Circle's greatest fear was that someday someone would piece together the truth. An Inquisitor might notice patterns in Dark Angels' deployments, might realize they were chasing something across the galaxy. A captured Fallen might reveal himself to Imperial authorities before the Dark Angels could silence him. A rival chapter might intercept communications that referenced the hunt. Any of these scenarios could trigger the exposure they had worked for 10 millennia to prevent. This fear shaped every decision the Inner Circle made. They had contingency plans for every conceivable security breach, from the relatively minor to the catastrophic. If a Fallen was captured by other Imperial forces, there were protocols for arranging his transfer to Dark Angel's custody, or, if necessary, his elimination before he could speak. If an outsider learned too much, there were ways to ensure that knowledge died with them. The Inner Circle would do anything, sacrifice anything, to protect the secret. No cost was too high. No action was beyond consideration. And yet, despite all their efforts, the secret remained unstable. Each year brought new risks, new close calls. The longer the hunt continued, the more chance there was of something going wrong. It was inevitable, really, that someday the truth would come out. The only question was when, and whether the Dark Angels would have redeemed themselves by then, or whether they would be caught still carrying the shame of Luther's betrayal. The Deathwing, keepers of the first secret. The Deathwing is simultaneously the Dark Angels' first company and the first level of true revelation. These warriors, clad in bone-white Terminator armor, represent the chapter's absolute elite. They are veterans who have served for centuries, who have proven their skill and loyalty beyond any doubt. But their primary importance isn't tactical. It's spiritual and operational. The Deathwing exists to hunt the fallen, to execute the Inner Circle's will, and to carry the burden of knowledge that would crush lesser warriors. The company's structure differs from standard Space Marine first companies. While other chapters' first companies serve primarily as heavy assault forces, deploying via Terminator armor to break enemy strongpoints, the Deathwing has a more specialized purpose. Yes, they fulfill the tactical role when needed, and they do it with devastating effectiveness. But their true mission is pursuit and capture of the fallen. Every member of the Deathwing is trained not just in combat, but in tracking, interrogation support, and security operations. Induction into the Deathwing follows a specific ritual that has remained largely unchanged for 10,000 years. A warrior selected for promotion is summoned to a private chamber deep within the rock. There, he meets with senior Deathwing members, often including interrogator chaplains and one of the chapter's librarians. The room's atmosphere is heavy with history and purpose. Ancient banners hang on the walls, each one telling a story of battles fought and victories won, but also of shame and betrayal. The ritual begins with questions. The candidate is asked about his loyalty, his understanding of duty, his commitment to the chapter. These aren't perfunctory questions. The interrogator chaplains use their considerable skill to read the warrior's responses, looking for any sign of doubt or corruption. They might ask seemingly unrelated questions, probing for weaknesses or hidden resentments. The process can take hours, with the candidate standing at attention throughout, knowing that his entire future hangs on this examination. If the candidate passes this initial testing, the revelation begins. He is told the story of Luther and the betrayal on Caliban. The tale is presented in careful detail, starting with the relationship between Luther and the lion, moving through Luther's growing resentment, and culminating in the terrible battle that destroyed their homeworld. The candidate learns that the fallen exist, that they are scattered across space and time, that some serve chaos while others simply
hide from their former brothers. The psychological impact of this moment cannot be overstated. Everything the candidate thought he knew about his chapter is suddenly cast in a different light. The pride he felt in being a dark angel is now tempered with shame. The glorious history he learned as a scout is revealed to be incomplete, sanitized for those who aren't ready to handle the truth. Some candidates react with visible shock. Others maintain their composure, though internally, they're reeling. The Deathwing officers watch carefully, gauging the response, ready to intervene if the candidate shows signs of mental breakdown. Once the initial revelation is delivered, the candidate is given time to process. He might be left alone in the chamber for hours, sitting with this new knowledge, wrestling with its implications. The interrogator chaplains know that acceptance cannot be forced. Each warrior must come to terms with the truth in his own way. Some rage against it, cursing Luther and the fallen. Others grow quiet and contemplative. A few ask questions, seeking to understand every detail. Eventually, the candidate is brought back before the Deathwing Council. If he has accepted the truth, if he has demonstrated that he can carry this burden without breaking, he is given a choice. He can join the Deathwing, dedicating himself to the hunt for the fallen and accepting all the responsibilities that entails. Or he can decline, in which case he will be subjected to memory modification to erase what he has learned, though this effectively ends his potential for advancement within the chapter. Almost all candidates accept. To decline would be to admit weakness, to fail a test that their brothers have passed. More than that, most warriors, upon learning of the fallen, feel an immediate need to hunt them. The betrayal is personal now, a stain not just on the chapter, but on themselves as individuals. They want to be part of the solution, to help erase this shame through action. Upon acceptance, the candidate undergoes the final stage of induction. He is presented with Terminator armor, often a suit with its own history of service in the hunt for the fallen. He swears new oaths, more binding than any he has taken before, promising absolute secrecy and eternal vigilance. He is marked with the Deathwing's insignia, the sword and wings that signify his new role, and he is given his first assignment in the hunt. The origin of the Deathwing's distinctive bone-white armor color is itself steeped in legend. According to chapter records,
Early in the Dark Angel's history, a Deathwing squad was left to defend a world against a Genestealer cult invasion, while the rest of the chapter responded to another emergency. The squad, believing they would die in the defense of the planet's people, painted their armor white as a death shroud, embracing their fate. Against all odds, they succeeded, wiping out the Genestealer infestation through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. When the chapter returned, they found their brothers alive, but bearing armor stained with their own blood and the ichor of their enemies. The bone-white color became the Deathwing's identifier, a reminder that its members walk with death and emerge triumphant. But there's another layer to this symbolism that only the inner circle fully appreciates. The white armor represents not just death, but purity through sacrifice. Every Deathwing member has sacrificed his innocence, has taken on the burden of the chapter's shame. The white stands in stark contrast to the dark green worn by the rest of the chapter, a visual representation of their unique role. They are separate, set apart, marked by knowledge and purpose that others don't share. In combat, the Deathwing deploys in several configurations. Standard Terminator squads provide heavy firepower and assault capability, armed with storm bolters and power fists, or thunder hammers and storm shields. These warriors advance methodically through enemy fire, their tactical dreadnought armor shrugging off hits that would kill regular Marines, delivering overwhelming force when they reach close combat range. Deathwing Knights represent an even more elite subgroup within the First Company. These warriors carry weapons and equipment that date back to the Legion's founding, including power maces that crackle with energy, and storm shields decorated with the symbols of Caliban's ancient knightly orders. The Knights serve as the Deathwing's leaders in the field, and as an inner circle within the First Company itself. They know secrets that even some Deathwing members don't. Details about specific Fallen, or about the most sensitive hunts. The Deathwing maintains its own fleet of Terminator-capable transport craft. Land Raiders emblazoned with the company's heraldry stand ready in the Rock's vehicle bays, each machine a work of art, maintained by the chapter's finest tech Marines. Teleportation chambers allow for instantaneous deployment, with Deathwing squads materializing directly into combat zones or appearing aboard enemy spacecraft. This capability is particularly useful in hunts for the Fallen, allowing the Deathwing to respond within moments when a target is located. Training in the Deathwing never truly ends. Even veterans who have served in the company for centuries continue to drill and practice. They study historical battles, learning from past successes and failures. They train in interrogation techniques, though the actual questioning of Fallen is reserved for the interrogator chaplains. They learn to recognize signs of chaos corruption, to detect the subtle tells that might indicate a fellow Dark Angel has been compromised. This constant training maintains their edge and reinforces the psychological conditioning necessary to carry their burden. The Deathwing also maintains the chapter's most extensive archives regarding the Fallen. In secured chambers within the Rock, they keep records of every known traitor, every suspected sighting, every failed capture attempt. These archives are organized with obsessive precision, cross-referenced in multiple ways, constantly updated as new information arrives. A Deathwing librarian might spend decades maintaining these records, ensuring that no detail is lost, that patterns can be recognized across centuries of data.
The relationship between the Deathwing and the chapter's other companies is complex. On one hand, the Deathwing veterans are respected and honored. When they deploy alongside battle brothers from the standard companies, they are looked to for leadership and tactical guidance. But there's also a distance, a sense that the Deathwing members are somehow apart. They keep their own counsel, discuss matters that others aren't privy to, and sometimes vanish on missions that are never explained. This separation can breed resentment among those who don't yet know the truth. A company captain might chafe at being subordinated to a Deathwing officer during a combined operation, particularly if that officer makes decisions that seem to contradict sound tactical doctrine. But he can't voice his complaints too strongly without risking being seen as insubordinate or potentially corrupted. The Deathwing's authority on matters relating to their mission is absolute, and questioning that authority is dangerous. Within the Deathwing itself, there are gradations of knowledge and responsibility. Newly inducted members might know only the basics about the Fallen. They understand that traitors exist and must be hunted, but they don't know all the names or all the details of past operations. As they serve longer, as they prove themselves in the hunt, they're granted access to more information. This internal hierarchy ensures that even if a Deathwing member were somehow compromised, the damage would be limited. The Deathwing's greatest successes are never publicly celebrated. When they capture a Fallen, when they prevent a corruption from spreading, when they close a security breach that might have exposed the secret, these victories are acknowledged only within the inner circle. There are no medals, no commendations in the chapter records that outsiders might see. The reward is simply knowing that they have served their chapter faithfully, that they have moved one step closer to redemption. But the failures haunt them. Every Fallen who escapes, every hunt that ends without capture, every traitor who dies rather than repenting adds to the weight they carry. The Deathwing's mission is ultimately futile in a sense. They can never truly succeed because they can never be certain they've found all the Fallen. There could always be one more, hidden somewhere in the galaxy, laughing at their efforts. This knowledge that their hunt might never end, that they might carry this shame forever, is perhaps the heaviest burden of all. The Ravenwing, the swift hunters. If the Deathwing represents the hammer that falls on the Fallen, then the Ravenwing is the blade that finds them. The Dark Angel's second company operates in the shadows of the galaxy, gathering intelligence, tracking targets, and preparing the ground for the captures that will follow. They are hunters in the truest sense, patient and relentless, willing to pursue a lead across star systems and through years of investigation. Where the Deathwing is ponderous strength, the Ravenwing is lethal speed. The company's operational structure is unique among Space Marine organizations. While other chapters' second companies might serve as general assault or tactical reserves, the Ravenwing is highly specialized. Every member is mounted, whether on bikes, land speeders, or other fast-moving vehicles. They train in high-speed pursuit, in hit-and-run tactics, in reconnaissance deep behind enemy lines. Their black armor and vehicles make them difficult to spot, and they exploit this advantage ruthlessly. But the Raven Wing's true purpose, like the Death Wings, goes beyond their apparent tactical role. The company is divided into distinct groups based on their level of knowledge about the fallen. The majority of Raven Wing members, particularly newer additions to the company, know nothing of the true hunt. They serve as skilled scouts and assault troops, performing missions that seem perfectly normal for a Space Marine formation. They think they're simply the chapter's fast attack specialists. The Black Knights form the Raven Wing's inner circle, the warriors who know the truth and coordinate the hunt. These veterans ride bikes that have been further enhanced with advanced weapons and armor, making them among the most lethal mobile forces in the Imperium. They carry plasma talons and corvus hammers, weapons that can penetrate even heavy armor at high speed. But more importantly, they carry the knowledge of what they're really searching for, and the authority to act on that knowledge without explanation. Induction into the Black Knights follows a similar pattern to Deathwing promotion, though with some differences. A Raven Wing member selected for elevation is brought before the company's senior officers, including the Raven Wing Master, and often representatives from both the Deathwing and the Interrogator chaplains. The revelation is presented in a way that emphasizes the candidate's new role as a hunter, as someone who will track prey that must never escape. The psychological impact is similar to Deathwing induction, but channeled differently. A Black Knight doesn't need to carry quite the same burden of shame and guilt. Instead, he needs to develop the patience and cunning of a hunter, the ability to follow leads that might seem dead ends, to recognize patterns in data that others would miss. The Black Knights become obsessed with their prey in a way that even some Deathwing members don't match. They are the bloodhounds, and nothing matters more than finding the scent. The Raven Wing's operations begin intelligence gathering. They maintain informant networks across dozens of sectors, paying attention to rumors and reports that might indicate a fallen's presence. A surge in Chaos cult activity on a particular world might be investigated. Sightings of a mysterious warrior matching the description of a known fallen traitor would be tracked down. Even something as subtle as a pattern of unexplained deaths or disappearances could trigger a Raven Wing investigation. When they identify a potential lead, the Raven Wing deploys reconnaissance teams. These might be single bike squads or larger formations, including land speeders equipped with sophisticated auspex and surveyor equipment. They move fast, using their speed to avoid detection or to escape if compromised. Their goal is to gather information without revealing their interest, because if a fallen realizes he's being hunted, he'll likely vanish, potentially setting the search back by years or decades. The technology the Raven Wing employs is among the most advanced in the chapter's arsenal. Their bikes are masterworks of engineering, capable of reaching incredible speeds while remaining stable enough for precision shooting. The machine spirits that inhabit these vehicles are ancient and respected, many having served the chapter since the Great Crusade. A Raven Wing Black Knight might ride the same bike for centuries, developing an almost telepathic bond with its machine spirit.
Land speeders provide the Raven Wing with airborne capability and heavier firepower. Some variants carry multi-meltas for anti-armor work, while others mount heavy bolters for suppression. Vengeance variants equipped with plasma storm batteries can devastate infantry formations. But beyond their combat role, these speeders serve as mobile command posts and sensor platforms, coordinating hunts across wide areas. The Raven Wing's tactics in battle revolve around mobility and overwhelming force at the decisive point. They strike from unexpected angles, using their speed to choose when and where engagements occur. A Raven Wing attack might begin with land speeders sweeping in to suppress anti-air defenses, followed by bike squads racing through the breach to hit priority targets. The enemy barely has time to react before the Dark Angels are gone, leaving destruction in their wake. But when hunting the Fallen, the Raven Wing's approach is more measured. They understand that their target is likely a veteran warrior with centuries of experience in evading capture. Subtle traps are set, escape routes quietly blocked, and the net tightens gradually. The Fallen might not even realize he's been found until it's too late, until Deathwing Terminators materialize around him via teleportation, and Raven Wing bikes seal every exit. The coordination between Raven Wing and Deathwing during these operations is crucial. The Raven Wing provides real-time intelligence, updating the Deathwing on the target's exact position and any complications that have arisen.
The Deathwing relies on this information to time their insertion perfectly. If the coordination fails, if the timing is even slightly off, the Fallen might escape, and months or years of work would be wasted. Not every hunt succeeds. The Fallen are survivors, warriors who have evaded capture for millennia. They know the Dark Angels' methods because they were once Dark Angels themselves. Some have learned to detect the signs of a Raven Wing investigation, the subtle indicators that they're being watched. When they realize the hunt is closing in, they run, using whatever resources they've accumulated to disappear. Failed hunts are debriefed extensively. The Raven Wing analyzes every decision, every moment where the operation might have been compromised. They look for patterns in their failures, trying to understand how the Fallen keep escaping. This information is fed back into their training. Their protocols are adjusted, and the next hunt incorporates the lessons learned. It's a constant process of evolution, predator and prey both adapting to each other's tactics. The Raven Wing Master holds one of the most important positions in the entire Dark Angels chapter. He coordinates not just his own company, but the broader hunt across the galaxy. He maintains contact with Raven Wing elements in successor chapters, sharing intelligence and coordinating operations. A hunt might span multiple chapters of the Unforgiven, with each contributing assets and information toward a single capture. The Raven Wing Master orchestrates this symphony of pursuit. Within the Raven Wing, there are specialists who focus on specific aspects of the hunt. Some become experts in analyzing historical records, looking for patterns that might indicate where a Fallen will surface next. Others specialize in interrogating captured individuals who might have encountered the Fallen without realizing it. Still others focus on the technical aspects, maintaining and improving the equipment that makes the hunt possible. The Black Knights, beyond being warriors, serve as teachers and mentors. They train newer Raven Wing members in the skills they'll need. though without revealing the true purpose behind those skills until the time is right. A sergeant might spend years instructing a promising Marine in tracking techniques, in how to read the subtle signs of passage or presence, all while that Marine thinks he's simply being groomed for general reconnaissance work. The psychological pressure on the Raven Wing is different from what the Deathwing experiences, but no less intense. The Deathwing carries the weight of shame and the burden of knowledge. The Raven Wing carries the frustration of hunts that stretch across decades. The constant worry that they're missing something, that a fallen is slipping through their fingers even as they search. Every delay, every cold trail, every escaped target is a personal failure that haunts them. Some Raven Wing veterans become so consumed by the hunt, they lose perspective on everything else. They see potential leads everywhere, interpret every piece of data as somehow connected to the fallen. The interrogator chaplains watch for this obsession, because while dedication is necessary, losing oneself entirely to the hunt can be as damaging as failing in duty. A warrior who can think of nothing but the fallen becomes predictable, and predictability is death in this shadow war. The Raven Wing also maintains safe houses and supply caches throughout the galaxy. These hidden facilities allow them to operate far from the rock for extended periods. A Raven Wing squad tracking a lead might spend months or even years away from the chapter, posing as mercenaries or claiming to be on other business while they continue their investigation. These deep cover operations require patience and discipline that goes beyond normal Space Marine training. Communication security is paramount for the Raven Wing. They use coded messages that only other members of the inner circle can fully decode. Even their internal communications are layered with encryption and misdirection, because they can never be certain who might be listening. A Raven Wing transmission might reference a completely fabricated mission, while the true meaning is hidden in what seems like routine status updates. The Raven Wing's greatest fear is that they'll identify a fallen, but fail to capture him before he can reveal himself to the wider Imperium. If a fallen were to approach an inquisitor or a rival chapter with information about the Dark Angel's shame, the consequences would be catastrophic. The Raven Wing operates with this anxiety constantly, knowing that every moment a fallen remains free is a moment when he might choose exposure over continued hiding. The interrogator chaplains and the rock. Deep within the rock, in chambers that exist on no official map, the interrogator chaplains conduct their grim work. These are not men of mercy or compassion. Despite wearing the insignia of the chapter's spiritual guardians, they are masters of pain, experts in breaking the will of those who have betrayed everything the Dark Angels stand for. Their tools are agony and time, and they wield both with terrible skill. A fallen who falls into their hands faces a fate that many would consider worse than death. The interrogator chaplains are chaplains first, trained in all the spiritual duties that role entails. They lead prayers, they oversee religious ceremonies, they minister to the spiritual needs of the battle brothers. But they also have a secondary, secret function that consumes the majority of their time and attention. They are the chapter's master interrogators, the warriors who must extract both information and repentance from captured fallen. This dual role creates a unique psychology, a mindset that can shift from spiritual comfort to inflicting exquisite torment without hesitation. The path to becoming an interrogator chaplain is long and arduous. Candidate must first serve as a regular chaplain, demonstrating both spiritual dedication and absolute loyalty to the chapter. He must be inducted into the inner circle, learning the truth about the fallen and proving he can carry that burden. Only then might he be selected for additional training in interrogation techniques. This training is comprehensive, covering psychology, physiology, and the application of pain in ways that break the mind without killing the body. The chambers where this work occurs are scattered throughout the rock's deepest levels. Some are traditional cells, small and cramped, designed to induce claustrophobia and despair. Others are larger rooms filled with equipment that would not look out of place in a torture museum, devices crafted specifically to cause suffering. Still others are more subtle, chambers where psychological pressure is applied through isolation, sensory deprivation, or carefully crafted illusions that erode the prisoner's sense of reality. The rock itself deserves explanation. This massive chunk of stone, all that remains of Caliban, serves as the Dark Angel's fortress monastery and mobile headquarters. It's large enough to qualify as a small moon, perhaps 10 miles in diameter, with the fortress built into and throughout its structure. The upper levels house the chapter's public spaces, training halls, armories, chapels, and barracks for the battle brothers. These areas are magnificent, decorated with banners and trophies from 10,000 years of warfare. But the deeper you descend into the rock, the more the character changes. Public spaces give way to restricted areas accessible only to those with proper clearance. These levels house the chapter's most sensitive facilities: vault containing ancient weapons and artifacts, libraries with records that must never be seen by outsiders, and command centers where the hunt for the fallen is coordinated. Security increases with each level, with automated defenses and psychic wards ensuring that unauthorized intrusion is essentially impossible. At the very deepest levels, in chambers carved from the raw stone of Caliban's corpse, the true horror of the Dark Angel's secret becomes visible. Here are the cells where captured fallen are held, often for decades or centuries. Some prisoners have been in these chambers since shortly after Caliban's destruction, kept alive through a combination of their genetically enhanced physiology and the dark technology the interrogator chaplains employ. They have endured torments that would drive normal humans mad within days, and yet they persist, either because they refuse to repent or because the interrogator chaplains aren't satisfied with their confession. The interrogation process follows specific protocols refined over 10 millennia. When a fallen is first brought to the rock, he's subjected to preliminary questioning. This phase is relatively gentle, an attempt to see if the prisoner might cooperate without needing extensive persuasion. Some fallen, particularly those who have simply been hiding rather than actively serving chaos, may repent quickly. They're tired of running, and being captured is almost a relief. These individuals might be inducted into the Death Wing after extensive vetting, their knowledge and experience too valuable to waste through execution. But many fallen refuse to cooperate. Some remain defiant, loyal to chaos, or simply unwilling to give their former brothers the satisfaction of breaking them. Others might want to repent but can't bring themselves to admit the depth of their betrayal. These prisoners are transferred to the deeper interrogation chambers, where the interrogator chaplains begin their work in earnest. The techniques employed are both physical and psychological. Physical torture breaks the body, creating a baseline of constant pain that makes resistance more difficult. But the interrogator chaplains understand that physical agony alone rarely succeeds. The fallen are space marines, warriors with pain tolerances far beyond normal humans. To truly break them requires attacking the mind, exploiting fears and guilts, creating psychological pressure that compounds the physical suffering. Some interrogations focus on guilt and shame. The interrogator chaplain reminds the prisoner of his oaths, of the brothers he betrayed, of the innocent people who suffered because of his actions. He paints a picture of the fallen's crimes in excruciating detail, forcing the prisoner to confront what he has become. For warriors who once held honor above all else, this psychological assault can be more effective than any physical torture. Other interrogations use isolation and sensory deprivation. The prisoner is placed in absolute darkness, in silence so complete that the only sound is his own breathing. Time loses meaning. Hours blend into days, days into weeks. The prisoner begins to hallucinate, to doubt his own senses. When the interrogator chaplain finally appears, it's like a lifeline to reality, and the prisoner becomes desperate to maintain that connection, even if it means confessing. The most sophisticated interrogations combine multiple approaches. Physical pain establishes control, while psychological manipulation erodes resistance. The interrogator chaplain might alternate between brutality and kindness, confusing the prisoner, making him uncertain of what to expect. At moments when the prisoner's defenses are weakest, questions are asked and answers extracted. The process can take years, but the interrogator chaplains are patient. They have eternity if needed. Asmodai is perhaps the most famous or infamous of the interrogator chaplains. He has served the Dark Angels for centuries, earning a reputation for unyielding dedication to his duty. Asmodai has broken more fallen than perhaps any other interrogator chaplain in the chapter's history. His methods are considered extreme even by the standards of his order, but no one can question his results. When Asmodai takes charge of an interrogation, the prisoner will break. It's only a question of when. Asmodee's philosophy centers on the idea that repentance must be absolute. It's not enough for a fallen to simply confess his crimes or provide information. He must truly repent, must reach a state where he understands the full weight of his betrayal and genuinely seeks forgiveness. Only then has the interrogation succeeded. Only then can the fallen's soul potentially be redeemed, even if his body must be destroyed afterward. The technology employed in these chambers comes from multiple sources. Some devices are standard Imperial torture equipment, refined over millennia of use against heretics and traitors. Others are more esoteric, incorporating archaeotech discovered in the ruins of Caliban, or adapted from Xenos devices. The interrogator chaplains aren't bound by squeamishness about the origin of their tools. If something works, if it helps extract repentance from the fallen, then its use is justified. One particularly horrific device is known as the Crown of Truth. This apparatus, placed on the prisoner's head, stimulates specific neural pathways while suppressing others. It makes lying essentially impossible, while amplifying feelings of guilt and shame. Under the Crown's influence, the prisoner relives his worst memories in vivid detail, experiencing them from the perspective of his victims. The psychological damage this causes is severe, but it often breaks resistance that survives other methods. The fate of a fallen who finally repents varies. Some, as mentioned, might be inducted into the death wing if their repentance seems genuine, and they possess knowledge or skills valuable enough to warrant the risk. These redeemed fallen undergo extensive psychological conditioning and are watched constantly for signs of backsliding. They can never be fully trusted, but they can be useful. They fight with the desperation of those seeking to atone for sins that can never truly be forgiven. Most repentant fallen, however, face a different end. Once they have confessed fully, once the interrogator chaplain is satisfied that true repentance has been achieved, the prisoner is granted the Emperor's peace. This is execution, but it's considered merciful. The fallen dies knowing that his soul might yet find redemption in death, that his final act was one of contrition rather than defiance. The body is typically destroyed completely, atomized to ensure nothing remains that could be used by chaos or discovered by outsiders. The most difficult cases are those fallen who have been so thoroughly corrupted by chaos that repentance may be impossible. These prisoners have fully embraced the ruinous powers, have committed acts so horrific that even if they wanted to repent, the psychological damage might be too severe. The interrogator chaplains continue their work regardless, because even from these most fallen brothers, information can be extracted. Names of other fallen, locations of hideouts, details about chaos plots. All of this intelligence is valuable, even if the prisoner's soul is beyond saving. There are whispers, never confirmed, that some interrogator chaplains have gone too far in their zeal, that they have broken prisoners beyond any possibility of genuine repentance, extracting confessions that are meaningless because the victim would say anything to make the torment stop. These whispers suggest that some interrogator chaplains are less interested in redemption and more interested in vengeance, in making the fallen suffer as payment for the shame they brought upon the chapter. If such abuses occur, they are never officially acknowledged, because to do so would be to question the entire system. The psychological toll on the interrogator chaplains themselves is rarely discussed, but undoubtedly severe. To spend decades or centuries inflicting suffering, to become intimately familiar with every method of breaking a person's will, must leave marks on the soul. The interrogator chaplains maintain their faith through rigorous spiritual discipline, through the conviction that their work is necessary and righteous. But some surely must wonder in their darkest moments whether they have become monsters in service of hunting monsters. The relationship between the interrogator chaplains and the rest of the chapter is complex. They are respected, certainly, for their dedication and the terrible burden they carry, but they are also feared. Even other members of the inner circle might be uncomfortable around them, aware of what they're capable of, uncertain whether that terrible focus might someday turn in their direction. The interrogator chaplains exist slightly apart from the normal chapter hierarchy, answerable primarily to the Supreme Grand Master and to their own order. Within the rock, there are legends about chambers even deeper than the known interrogation levels, places where reality grows thin, where the warp seeps through from some wound in the barrier between dimensions. These legendary chambers supposedly house the most dangerous prisoners, fallen so corrupted that they can no longer be kept in normal cells without risking contamination spreading. Whether these deepest levels truly exist or are simply the product of fearful imagination is known only to the highest levels of the inner circle. The rock itself moves through the galaxy following the chapter's needs. Its warp drives are among the most powerful in the Imperium, allowing it to traverse vast distances. When the Dark Angels go to war, the rock often accompanies them, serving as mobile fortress and command center. Its weapons batteries can reduce planets to molten slag, and its launch bays contain enough strike craft to contest control of entire star systems. But its true importance lies not in its military capabilities, but in what it contains, in the secrets buried in its depths. Security protocols on the rock are extraordinarily complex. Every Dark Angel is tracked constantly through various means: biological, mechanical, and psychic. The chapter's librarians maintain psychic wards throughout the facility, watching for signs of chaos, corruption, or unauthorized telepathic communication. Servo skulls equipped with sophisticated sensors patrol corridors, their machine spirits programmed to report any anomalies. It would be easier to infiltrate a fortress monastery of the Adeptus Custodes than to access the rock's restricted areas without authorization. Yet despite all these precautions, there are stories of successful infiltrations or escapes. A few fallen over 10,000 years have supposedly managed to break free from the rock's deepest cells. How they accomplished this is unclear. Perhaps through aid from chaos, perhaps through allies within the chapter itself, or perhaps through sheer determination and 10 centuries of planning. These escaped prisoners become the highest priority targets for recapture because they know too much about the rock's internal layout and security measures. The Watchers in the dark add another layer of mystery to the rock. These small, robed figures appear throughout the fortress, never speaking, their faces always hidden beneath their cowls. They seem to serve the Dark Angels, performing small tasks and occasionally offering guidance, but their true nature and purpose remain unclear even to most of the inner circle. They were present on Caliban before the Emperor arrived, and they survived the planet's destruction. Some believe they are minor warp entities bound by ancient pacts. Others think they might be the last remnants of Caliban's original inhabitants, transformed by exposure to the warp. The Watchers know secrets that even the Supreme Grand Master doesn't, including, if the legends are true, the location where the lion sleeps. The chapels within the rock serve dual purposes. On the surface, they are places of worship where the Dark Angels come to pray and meditate. The ceremonies conducted there would be familiar to any member of the ecclesiarchy. Prayers to the Emperor, litanies of faith, rituals that reinforce loyalty to the Imperium. But some chapels have hidden features, chambers behind the altars or beneath the floors, where more secret rituals occur. These might be induction ceremonies for the inner circle, or meetings where the hunt's progress is discussed, or even darker rites whose purpose is known only to the interrogator chaplains. The fortress monastery's archives contain records spanning 10 millennia. Every hunt, every capture, every interrogation is documented in exhaustive detail. The scribes who maintain these records are themselves members of the inner circle, trusted to handle information that could destroy the chapter if it ever became public. They work in scriptoriums deep within the rock, transcribing reports and cross-referencing data, searching for patterns that might predict where Fallen will surface next. This work is tedious, but crucial. The Dark Angels' institutional memory is one of their greatest advantages in the hunt. Training facilities within the rock allow the Dark Angels to practice for every conceivable combat scenario. But these facilities also serve another purpose. Mock-ups of known Fallen hideouts allow Deathwing and Ravenwing units to rehearse capture operations before deploying. The chapter maintains files on each known Fallen, including their fighting style, preferred weapons, and likely tactics. This intelligence is used to create training scenarios as realistic as possible, preparing the capture teams for what they'll face. The Rock's Medicae facilities are among the finest in the Imperium, staffed by apothecaries who have served for centuries. They can heal injuries that would be fatal to anyone else, replace entire organ systems, or rebuild a Marine's body from the most catastrophic damage. But these same apothecaries also understand anatomy in ways that make them valuable to the interrogator chaplains. They know exactly how much damage a Space Marine can sustain before dying, how to keep a prisoner alive despite injuries that should be fatal, how to amplify pain without causing death. This knowledge is applied, reluctantly, but without hesitation when necessary. Life for a Dark Angel stationed on the rock follows a strict routine. Training, prayer, maintenance of equipment, study of chapter history and tactics. The days blend together,
marked by rituals that have been observed for millennia. But underlying all of this is the constant awareness of the secret, the knowledge that everything they do serves a purpose beyond what appears on the surface. Every battle won, every training exercise completed, every prayer offered is ultimately in service of the hunt for the fallen and the redemption of the chapter's honor. Cipher, the enigma. Among all the fallen, one stands apart. He is known only as Cipher, the Lord of the Fallen, though whether he truly leads them or simply acts as their symbol is unclear. For 10,000 years, he has moved through the galaxy like a ghost, appearing at crucial moments, influencing events in ways that seem both helpful and harmful to the Imperium, and always evading capture. The Dark Angels hunt him with an obsession that exceeds their pursuit of any other fallen, because Cipher represents everything they fear and everything they desire to destroy. Cipher's identity is one of the greatest mysteries in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The name itself is a title, not a personal designation. On ancient Caliban, Cipher was the title given to the guardian of secrets within the Order, the knightly organization that the Lion once led. Whoever held the title served as keeper of traditions and hidden knowledge, a position of great trust. After Caliban's destruction, the title appeared again, now borne by a fallen who seemed to embody the concept of secrets taken to its extreme.
Who is the current Cipher? Theories abound, but certainty is impossible. Some believe he is Zahariel, the librarian who played a significant role in Caliban's final days and who was close to Luther. Others think he might be one of the original Terran Dark Angels, a warrior who predated the discovery of Caliban entirely. Still others speculate that Cipher is not a single individual, but a title passed down through generations of fallen, with different warriors assuming the role when the previous bearer dies or is captured. The Dark Angels have captured individuals claiming to be Cipher multiple times, but whether any of these were the true Cipher remains unknown. What makes Cipher different from other fallen is his pattern of behavior. He doesn't simply hide or serve chaos in obvious ways. Instead, he operates with apparent purpose, following an agenda that no one, including possibly the Chaos Gods themselves, fully understands. He appears on battlefields where his presence seems to tip the balance in the Imperium's favor, fighting alongside Imperial forces against Chaos or Xenos threats. Yet he also appears at sites of Chaos incursions, his presence somehow connected to warp rifts opening or demonic invasions occurring. Cipher carries two weapons that have become his signature. The first is a plasma pistol of ancient design, beautifully crafted, possibly dating back to the Dark Age of technology. He wields this weapon with extraordinary skill, his shots precise and devastating. The second weapon is a sword he carries on his back, wrapped in cloth, never drawn. This sword is believed by many to be the Lion Sword, one of the legendary weapons that belonged to Lion L. Johnson himself. Why Cipher carries this blade but never uses it is a question that has tormented the Dark Angels for millennia. The Lion Sword's significance cannot be overstated. This was the Primarch's personal weapon, a blade that had been at his side during the Great Crusade, that had been present at some of the Imperium's most important battles. After Caliban's destruction, the sword disappeared, presumed lost in the warp storm that consumed the planet. If Sci-Fi truly possesses it, the implications are staggering. How did he obtain it? What does he plan to do with it? And most importantly, does his possession of the sword indicate some connection to the lion himself? One theory, whispered among certain circles within the inner circle, suggests that Sci-Fi is trying to reach Terra. Across his 10,000 years of wandering, his movements, when plotted on galactic maps, seem to follow a general trend toward the Imperium's capital. He has been spotted progressively closer to the solar system over the millennia, though his path is far from direct. If his goal is indeed Terra, what does he intend to do there? Present the lion sword to the Emperor? Reveal the Dark Angel's secret to the High Lords? Or something else entirely? Some purpose no one has yet conceived. Sci-Fi's combat capabilities are legendary. He has survived encounters with some of the galaxy's most dangerous warriors and emerged unscathed. He moves with a speed and grace that seem impossible, dodging attacks that should be unavoidable, his plasma pistol never missing its mark. Some who have fought him report that he seems to know what his opponents will do before they do it, as if he can predict their actions through some form of precognition. Whether this is psychic ability, perfect tactical analysis, or something else entirely, remains unknown. The Dark Angels have come close to capturing Sci-Fi dozens of times over the millennia. Elaborate traps have been set, entire armies deployed to corner him, yet he always escapes. Sometimes his escape seems almost miraculous, as if reality itself bends to ensure his freedom. Other times, allies appear from nowhere to extract him, warriors whose identities and loyalties are impossible to determine. There are even reports of chaos forces intervening to prevent his capture, though Sci-Fi has never been observed serving chaos directly. This raises another question about Sci-Fi's true allegiance. Is he a servant of chaos, playing a long game whose purpose will only become clear when it's too late to stop? Or is he somehow working against the ruinous powers, pursuing some goal that happens to align with chaos interests in some ways while opposing them in others? Some within the Dark Angels believe Sci-Fi might even be loyal to the Emperor in his own twisted way, that his actions, however incomprehensible, serve some greater purpose that will only become apparent in retrospect. The psychological impact of Sci-Fi on the Dark Angels cannot be overstated. He represents their failure. Every time he escapes, every time he appears and vanishes before they can respond, it's a reminder that their hunt is incomplete, that their redemption remains out of reach. Some Dark Angels have become obsessed with Sci-Fi specifically, dedicating their entire existence to his capture. These warriors study every report of his appearances, analyze his patterns, try to predict where he'll surface next. This obsession can be productive, driving them to extraordinary efforts, but it can also be destructive. consuming them to the point where they lose perspective on everything else. Sci-Fi has interacted with forces outside the Dark Angels and the Fallen. He has fought alongside Imperial Guard regiments, apparently helping them win critical battles before vanishing. He has been spotted on space hulks and in the ruins of ancient cities, always searching for something, though what he seeks is unclear. He has even, according to some reports, appeared before members of the Inquisition. Though if any Inquisitor has successfully detained him, that fact has been suppressed. The relationship between Sci-Fi and other Fallen is ambiguous. Some Fallen seem to know him, to take orders from him or coordinate their actions with his. Others appear to avoid him, as if his presence brings unwanted attention from the Dark Angels. There are no confirmed reports of Sci-Fi leading a warband of Fallen or organizing them into a cohesive force. If he is the Lord of the Fallen, his leadership is subtle and indirect, more symbolic than practical. One of the most disturbing possibilities about Sci-Fi is that he might know something the Dark Angels don't. Something about the Lion, about Luther's betrayal, or about the true nature of what happened on Caliban. If his possession of the Lion Sword is genuine, it suggests he was present at or near the Lion's final confrontation with Luther. He might have witnessed events that even the Inner Circle's most detailed records don't capture. This potential knowledge makes him invaluable as a source of intelligence, but it also makes him incredibly dangerous. What he knows could reshape the Dark Angels' understanding of their own history, and not necessarily in ways they would want. The Dark Angels have standing orders regarding Sci-Fi that supersede nearly everything else. If intelligence suggests he's in a sector, all available forces are to converge on his location immediately. Other missions are abandoned, allies are left without support, and the entire chapter mobilizes. This has caused friction with other Imperial organizations who don't understand why the Dark Angels suddenly pull out of critical operations. But the Inner Circle considers Sci-Fi's capture worth almost any cost. If they could bring him before the interrogator chaplains, if they could extract his secrets and understand his purpose, it might provide the breakthrough they need to finally end the hunt. Some scholars of the Dark Angels' history have noted that Sci-Fi's appearances often correlate with significant events in the Imperium's fate. He was reportedly present during several Black Crusades, though whether he fought for or against the forces of chaos is disputed. He appeared during the Plague Wars, during the opening of the Great Rift, during other momentous occasions that shaped the galaxy's future. This pattern suggests either incredible luck or some form of prescience, the ability to know where and when his presence will matter most. The most recent reports place Sci-Fi near or possibly on Terra itself, having somehow penetrated the solar system's defenses. If true, this represents the culmination of 10,000 years of movement toward the Imperium's heart. What he intends to do there, whether he plans to present the Lion Sword to the Emperor or has some other purpose, remains to be seen. The Dark Angels, naturally, are in pursuit, desperate to capture him before whatever he's planning comes to fruition. The Hexagrammaton, 6 Wings of War. Before the Lion's return, before the betrayal on Caliban, the Dark Angels' Legion was organized differently than the chapter that emerged from the heresy. They used a system called the Hexagrammaton, meaning 6 wings, 6 specialized formations that represented different aspects of warfare. Each wing had its own heraldry, traditions, and tactical doctrines. Together, they made the Dark Angels one of the most versatile and deadly legions in the Emperor's arsenal. Understanding the Hexagrammaton provides insight into what the Dark Angels once were and what they might have become if Caliban hadn't fallen. The 6 wings were the Deathwing, the Raven Wing, the Dreadwing, the Storm Wing, the Iron Wing, and the Fire Wing. Each represented a different philosophy of war, a different answer to how battles should be fought and won. A Dark Angel's force might include elements from multiple wings, combining their specializations to create a perfectly balanced strike force. This organizational flexibility was one of the Legion's greatest strengths during the Great Crusade. The Deathwing, even in the Legion era, represented the assault elite. These were the warriors who wore Terminator armor, who teleported directly into the heart of enemy positions and fought in the most brutal close-quarters combat. Their heraldry was different then, not yet the bone white that would become their signature after the Horus Heresy, but their role was essentially the same: strike hard, strike fast, and hold the line no matter the cost. The Raven Wing served as the Legion's outriders and scouts, mounted on bikes and speeders, ranging ahead of the main force to gather intelligence and harry enemy formations. They were the eyes of the Legion, reporting back on terrain, enemy positions, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. In battle, they struck at flanks and supply lines, disrupting enemy operations and preventing organized retreat. Their speed and mobility made them invaluable in the vast campaigns of the Great Crusade. The Dreadwing was perhaps the most controversial of the 6 wings. They specialized in total warfare, in the complete destruction of enemy forces through any means necessary. The Dreadwing didn't simply defeat enemies, they obliterated them, using forbidden weapons, virus bombs, rad weapons, and other armaments that many found distasteful. When the Lion wanted something, not just conquered but erased from existence, he deployed the Dreadwing. Their heraldry featured death's head symbols, and their reputation was dark even among their own Legion. The use of weapons like phosphex and the various horrors of the destroyer arsenals was largely the Dreadwing's domain. These were tools that violated what many considered the acceptable conduct of warfare. Weapons that didn't just kill, but that rendered entire worlds uninhabitable, that caused suffering beyond what was tactically necessary. The Dreadwing's philosophy was that some enemies didn't deserve honorable defeat. Some threats needed to be expunged so completely that nothing remained, not even memory. The Lion employed the Dreadwing judiciously, understanding that their methods, while effective, carried political and moral costs. But he also recognized that sometimes such methods were necessary. The Rangdan Xenocides, those apocalyptic campaigns that depleted the Legion's numbers, saw extensive Dreadwing deployment. The Rangdan were a threat that couldn't be merely defeated. They had to be rendered extinct, their works destroyed, their very existence scrubbed from the galaxy. The Dreadwing accomplished this task with grim efficiency. The Stormwing specialized in lightning warfare and void combat. They were the Legion's shock troops, in a different sense than the Deathwing, focused not on holding ground but on seizing it through overwhelming assault. Stormwing formations would deploy via drop pod or boarding torpedo, securing beachheads before the enemy could respond. They excelled at naval boarding actions,
turning enemy ships into charnel houses through brutal room-to-room combat. Their heraldry featured lightning bolts and storm clouds, appropriate symbols for warriors who struck like thunder. The Iron Wing represented the Legion's heavy armored formations. These were the tank commanders, the artillery specialists, the warriors who understood that sometimes battles were won through firepower and steel rather than individual heroism. The Iron Wing maintained and deployed the Legion's heaviest vehicles: Land Raiders, Predators, Vindicators, and Spartans. They worked closely with the Mechanicum, understanding machine spirits and the rituals necessary to maintain complex equipment. When the Dark Angels needed to break a siege or conduct their own, the Iron Wing provided the Iron Fist. The Fire Wing was the most enigmatic of the 6 wings, specializing in intelligence operations, infiltration, and what would later be called Black Ops. Fire Wing operatives worked in small teams, often operating independently of the main Legion, conducting missions that officially never happened. They gathered intelligence, assassinated key enemy leaders, sabotaged crucial infrastructure, and sowed confusion in enemy ranks. Their methods were subtle where the other wings were overt, and their successes were often invisible, because the best intelligence operation is one that prevents a battle from being necessary in the first place. Each wing had its own command structure, though all ultimately answered to the Lion or his appointed deputies. A warrior might serve in one wing for years before being transferred to another, gaining experience in different forms of warfare. This cross-training created Dark Angels who understood battle from multiple perspectives, who could think tactically, strategically, and operationally. It was part of what made the Legion so formidable during the Great Crusade. The Hexagrammaton began to decline during the Horus Heresy. The chaos of that civil war, the demands of fighting across the entire galaxy simultaneously, made maintaining distinct wings increasingly difficult. Formations were assembled based on immediate needs rather than doctrinal purity. Elements of different wings fought together
without the careful planning and coordination that had once been standard. The organizational clarity that had defined the Hexagrammaton eroded under the pressure of constant warfare. By the time Caliban fell and the Legion was broken, only 2 wings survived in recognizable form: the Deathwing and the Raven Wing. These formations had proven essential to the hunt for the fallen, and their specialized roles couldn't be easily replaced. But the other wings gradually faded. The Dreadwing's methods became too problematic in an Imperium increasingly wary of excessive destruction. The Stormwing's functions were absorbed into the chapter's standard companies. The Iron Wing became simply the armored units that all chapters maintained, and the Fire Wing vanished entirely. Their intelligence operations either discontinued or so deeply buried that even most of the inner circle didn't know if they still existed. There are those within the Dark Angels who mourn the loss of the Hexagrammaton, who believe that the chapter would be more effective if they returned to that organizational model. They argue that the specialization made the Legion stronger, that the current structure, while adequate, doesn't leverage the full potential of what the Dark Angels could be. But organizational change on this scale would require approval from the highest levels of the inner circle. And there's little appetite for such reform while the hunt for the fallen continues to consume most of the chapter's attention and resources. Interestingly, some of the successor chapters that emerged from the Dark Angels have retained or reinvented elements of the Hexagrammaton. These chapters might have formations that echo the old wings, maintaining traditions that the parent chapter has let fade. When the Unforgiven coordinate operations, these varied organizational approaches can actually be beneficial, allowing each chapter to contribute its unique strengths to combined operations. The legacy of the Hexagrammaton lives on in the Dark Angels' culture, even if not in their formal organization. The chapter still values versatility, still trains its warriors in multiple styles of combat, still believes that a true Dark Angel should be capable of fighting in any environment and under any conditions. The spirit of the Six Wings persists, even if their formal structure doesn't. The lions return and the risen. For 10,000 years the lion slept, deep within the rock, in a chamber known only to the watchers in the dark. Lion L. Johnson remained in stasis, his mortal wounds sustained in battle with Luther, held in suspended animation. The Watchers tended him across the millennia, maintaining the mechanisms that preserved his life, waiting for a time when he could be awakened. That time came in the 42nd millennium, during what the Imperium called the Indomitus Crusade, when the galaxy burned with war on a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy itself. The Lion's awakening was not a gentle process. The mechanism that had kept him alive began to fail, damaged by time, and perhaps by the changing nature of reality itself following the opening of the Great Rift. The Watchers recognized that they could no longer maintain the stasis, that the lion would either wake or die. They chose to risk awakening him, using methods and rituals they had preserved since the Legion's founding. The Primarch's eyes opened for the first time in 10 millennia, and he returned to a galaxy that was both familiar and utterly transformed. The lion emerged from his chamber to find the rock in chaos. Dark Angels fought desperately against a chaos incursion, demons having breached the outer defenses and pushed deep into the fortress monastery. The chapter's Supreme Grand Master was engaged across the facility, coordinating the defense while trying to understand how the enemy had penetrated their security. None of them knew that their Primarch had awakened, that the greatest warrior their gene line had ever produced was walking among them. The lion didn't announce himself. Instead, he assessed the situation with the tactical acumen that had made him one of the Emperor's greatest generals. He saw where the defenses were failing, where the Dark Angels were overextended, and where the key points of the battle lay. Then he entered the fight, moving through the rock like an angel of death, his skills honed during the Great Crusade and beyond undiminished by his long sleep. dark angels fighting desperately against overwhelming odds suddenly found a warrior fighting beside them, someone who moved with inhuman grace and struck with impossible power. Some recognized the weapons he carried, ancient blades that had been stored in the chapter's most sacred armories, but the connection didn't immediately register. It wasn't until the lion personally slew the demon leading the invasion, driving his sword through its immaterial form and banishing it back to the warp, that recognition began to spread. The revelation of the lion's return was carefully managed by those who understood what had happened. The Supreme Grand Master and his closest advisors met with the Primarch in private, explaining what had occurred during his absence: the fall of Caliban, the hunt for the fallen, the 10,000 years of shame and secrecy. The lion listened to their account with an expression that gave away nothing, though internally he must have been processing the magnitude of what had transpired. The lion's response to learning about the fallen and the Dark Angel's obsessive hunt for them was surprising to some. He didn't condemn the chapter for keeping secrets or approve of every decision they'd made. Instead, he acknowledged the complexity of their situation, while also recognizing that the hunt had consumed them in unhealthy ways. The lion understood pragmatism and necessity, but he also saw that his sons had become so focused on the past that they were compromising their ability to serve the Imperium in the present. One of the lion's first major decisions was regarding the fallen themselves. He recognized that not all of them were irredeemable servants of chaos. Some had simply been caught up in Luther's rebellion, had followed orders from their commander without fully understanding what they were doing. Others had spent 10,000 years hiding, living quiet lives, trying to atone in their own ways for their role in the betrayal. The lion implemented a new category for such individuals: the risen, fallen who had been redeemed and brought back into the fold. The risen represent a controversial but necessary evolution in how the Dark Angels deal with their past. These are former fallen who have proven themselves trustworthy, who have fought alongside the lion and demonstrated that their loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium supersedes whatever oaths they might have sworn during Caliban's final days. They wear modified armor, maintaining their identity as separate from the standard Dark Angels, while also marking them as reintegrated into the chapter's structure. The creation of the Risen caused significant tension within the inner circle. Some officers, particularly among the interrogator chaplains, viewed it as betrayal of everything they had worked for. They had spent millennia hunting the fallen, torturing them, breaking them, or executing them. Now the Primarch was simply forgiving some of them? It seemed to undermine the entire foundation of the post-heresy Dark Angel's identity and purpose. But the lion's authority was absolute. He was the Primarch, the Gene Father, and his word was law. Those who opposed his decision could voice their concerns, but ultimately, they had to obey. The lion made it clear that he understood their feelings, that he appreciated their dedication to the hunt, but that pragmatism required accepting help from wherever it could be found. The galaxy was burning, and the Dark Angels needed every warrior they could field, even if some of those warriors carried complicated histories. The Risen proved their worth quickly. They possessed knowledge of chaos operations, of how the Fallen who had fully turned to the ruinous powers operated and thought. They could predict enemy movements in ways that even the most experienced interrogator chaplain couldn't, because they had lived among the enemy. Their insight made them invaluable for certain operations, particularly those involving other Fallen or Chaos forces that used similar tactics. Moreover, the Risen's very existence served a psychological purpose. They demonstrated that redemption was possible, that the stain of Luther's betrayal didn't have to be permanent. For 10,000 years, the Dark Angels had believed that Fallen could only be redeemed through death, that their crimes were so severe that no amount of service could atone for them. The Risen proved this wrong. They showed that with genuine repentance and service, even the Fallen could rise again. The Lion's return also changed how the Dark Angels interacted with the wider Imperium. The Primarch had no patience for the excessive secrecy that had characterized the chapter for millennia. While he understood the need to protect certain information, he also recognized that the obsessive compartmentalization had made the Dark Angels less effective. He began authorizing greater cooperation with other Imperial forces, allowing Dark Angels to coordinate more openly with other chapters and with the Inquisition, though still maintaining security around the most sensitive matters. This shift in approach wasn't universally welcomed. Some Dark Angels had internalized the culture of secrecy so deeply that they were uncomfortable with more open operations. They worried that any relaxation of security protocols would lead to exposure, that the secret they had protected for so long would finally come out. The Lion addressed these concerns directly, explaining that the secret had less power if they didn't allow it to control them, that strength came from confidence rather than from hiding. The Lion also began rebuilding relationships with other Primarchs who had returned, or with forces loyal to those Primarchs. He met with Rebute Gilliman, the returned Primarch of the Ultramarines who now served as the Imperial Regent. Their conversation must have been complex, as the two had never been particularly close during the Great Crusade, their approaches to warfare and command differing significantly, but both recognized the necessity of cooperation in the face of the threats the Imperium faced. Under the Lion's leadership, the Dark Angels began deploying differently. Rather than disappearing mid-battle to chase rumors of Fallen, they fulfilled their commitments to Allied forces while simultaneously conducting the hunt. The Lion created specialized formations designed specifically for tracking and capturing Fallen, freeing the main body of the chapter to focus on standard operations. This organizational change made the Dark Angels more reliable allies while actually increasing their effectiveness in the hunt, because dedicated specialists could pursue leads more efficiently than pulling random companies away from other duties. The Lion also addressed the torture chambers deep within the rock. While he didn't shut them down entirely, recognizing that some prisoners genuinely needed extreme measures to break them, he implemented oversight and guidelines.
Interrogations would be conducted with specific objectives and time limits. Torture for torture's sake. Vengeance disguised as interrogation was forbidden. The interrogator chaplains were reminded that their goal was information and genuine repentance, not punishment. Some adapted to these new rules easily. Others struggled, their methods so ingrained after millennia that changing them felt wrong. The fate of Luther, still imprisoned in the rock after 10,000 years, became a matter of particular
interest. The lion visited his former brother, finding him mad but occasionally lucid, still babbling about forgiveness and waiting for the lion's return. Their conversation, if it could be called that, was private, witnessed by none. What the lion said to Luther, whether he offered forgiveness or condemnation, is known only to the Primarch himself. Luther remains imprisoned, but there are whispers that the lion visits him periodically, that whatever happened between them on Caliban is not yet fully resolved. The lion's presence also reinvigorated the Dark Angel's successor chapters, the Unforgiven. These chapters had maintained the hunt for the fallen across their own areas of operation, sharing intelligence and coordinating captures. Now they had their Gene Father to guide them, to provide strategic direction, and to embody the ideals they all aspired to reach. The coordination between the Unforgiven improved dramatically, with the lion personally overseeing major operations that involved multiple chapters working in concert. Perhaps most significantly, the lion's return gave the Dark Angels something they had lacked for 10 millennia: hope. For so long, the chapter had existed in a state of perpetual shame, fighting not to win, but to atone, hunting the fallen not to achieve victory, but to erase evidence of their failure. The lion's presence reminded them that they were more than their shame, that they were warriors of the Imperium with a proud history that predated Caliban's fall. They could take pride in their achievements while acknowledging their failures, could move forward while respecting the past. The lion himself has adapted to the changed galaxy with remarkable speed. The political situation is vastly different from what he knew during the Great Crusade. The Emperor is entombed on the Golden Throne, neither alive nor dead, sustained by the sacrifice of thousands of psychers daily. The Imperium is split nearly in half by the Great Rift, a massive warp storm that cuts across the galaxy. Chaos is more powerful than it has been since the Horus Heresy, and Xenos threats proliferate on every border. But the lion was always a pragmatist, someone who dealt with reality as it existed rather than as he wished it to be. He assessed the current situation, identified the greatest threats, and began deploying his sons accordingly. The Dark Angels, for the first time in millennia, were being led by someone with the vision and authority to use them to their full potential. The difference in their effectiveness was immediately apparent to anyone who fought alongside them. The lion's approach to warfare remains what it always was: ruthlessly efficient. He doesn't fight for glory or honor in the abstract sense. He fights to win, using whatever methods are necessary to achieve victory. This pragmatism sometimes puts him at odds with other Imperial commanders, who are more concerned with following doctrinal approaches or maintaining certain appearances. But the lion's record speaks for itself. Campaigns that might have dragged on for years are concluded in months under his leadership. One area where the lion's influence has been particularly significant is in dealing with other fallen who have not yet been captured. His personal involvement in some of these hunts has led to outcomes that would have been impossible under previous leadership. Some fallen, upon learning that the lion himself has returned, have voluntarily surrendered, seeking redemption directly from their Primarch. Others have fought with renewed desperation, knowing that if the lion has come for them personally, there will be no escape. The lion has also begun to reveal some of the truths about Caliban's fall that even the inner circle didn't know. He was there, after all, for the final confrontation with Luther. He knows details about what happened, about what Luther was trying to achieve, about the forces that were manipulating events. Some of these revelations have been unsettling for the Dark Angels, challenging assumptions they've held for 10,000 years, but they've also provided context that helps them understand their enemy better. One particularly significant revelation concerns the nature of the warp storm that destroyed Caliban. The lion has confirmed that it wasn't simply the Chaos Gods lashing out in fury at Luther's failure to kill him. The storm was also a consequence of rituals Luther had been performing, attempts to access power that he couldn't control. In a sense, Luther destroyed Caliban himself, though not intentionally. The planet's death was the result of his desperation and the Chaos Power's manipulation, a tragedy that might have been avoided if Luther had accepted his circumstances, rather than seeking to change them through forbidden means. The lion has also addressed the question of Sci-Fi directly. He knows who Sci-Fi is, or at least he knows things about Sci-Fi's identity that he hasn't fully shared with the inner circle. When asked whether Sci-Fi should remain the top priority for capture, the lion's response was ambiguous. He suggested that Sci-Fi might be serving a purpose, that his actions, however incomprehensible they appear, might actually be aligned with the Imperium's interests in ways that aren't immediately obvious. This has created confusion among those Dark Angels who have dedicated their existence to Sci-Fi's capture, leaving them uncertain whether to continue their pursuit with the same intensity. The question of the Lion Sword, if Sci-Fi indeed possesses it, has also been addressed. The lion has indicated that the sword's location is less important than ensuring it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. If Sci-Fi is carrying it toward Terra, if he intends to present it to the Emperor or place it in the Imperial Palace, then perhaps that's where the blade is meant to be. This pragmatic approach frustrates those who see the sword as a symbol that must be reclaimed. But the lion's priorities are clear. Symbols matter less than practical results. The lion's leadership style is notably different from what the Dark Angels have grown accustomed to over the millennia. The Supreme Grand Masters who led the chapter in his absence were products of the Inner Circle's culture, steeped in secrecy and driven by shame. The lion carries no such shame. He acknowledges that mistakes were made, that betrayal occurred, but he doesn't allow the past to paralyze the present. This forward-looking approach is gradually reshaping the chapter's culture, though 10,000 years of tradition don't change overnight. Training under the lion's supervision has also evolved. He personally oversees combat drills for promising warriors, teaching techniques and strategies that date back to the Great Crusade. He shares lessons learned from fighting alongside his brother Primarchs, from campaigns against enemies that no longer exist or that have since evolved. The Dark Angels are being reconnected to their roots, to the time when they were simply the First Legion, the Emperor's finest warriors, rather than a chapter defined primarily by its shame and its secret. The Lion has also begun integrating Primaris Space Marines into the Dark Angels in greater numbers. These new warriors, created from enhanced gene seed and implanted with additional organs, represent the Imperium's latest attempt to create superior soldiers. The Lion sees their potential clearly and has worked to ensure they're fully incorporated into the chapter structure. Some traditionalists were initially resistant to Primaris Marines, viewing them as somehow separate from true Dark Angels. The Lion has made it clear that all who carry his gene seed are his sons, regardless of when or how they were created. The relationship between the Lion and the Watchers in the Dark has also become more visible. These mysterious beings have served the Dark Angels since before the Emperor's arrival on Caliban, but their nature and purpose have always been unclear. The Lion's return has brought them out of the deepest shadows. They attend him directly, appearing at his side during important moments, offering guidance or warnings in ways that suggest they see more of reality than even the Primarch does. Their presence has reminded the Dark Angels that their chapter's history extends back to Caliban's ancient past, to powers and pacts that predate the Imperium itself. Looking forward, the Lion's goals for his chapter are becoming clearer. He wants the Dark Angels to reclaim their position as the First Legion in more than just name and numbering. He wants them to be the example that other chapters look to, the standard by which all Space Marines are measured. This means not just military excellence, which they've always possessed, but also integrity, reliability, and the wisdom to know when to fight and when to seek other solutions. The hunt for the fallen will continue, because there are still traitors who serve chaos and who pose genuine threats to the Imperium. But under the Lion's leadership, the hunt is becoming more targeted and efficient, less all-consuming. The Dark Angels are learning to balance their unique burden with their broader responsibilities. They're becoming, perhaps for the first time since Caliban's fall, a chapter that defines itself by what it fights for, rather than what it's trying to hide. The Lion has also begun to repair relationships between the Dark Angels and other chapters that had grown strained. During the millennia of his absence, the Dark Angels' secretive nature and tendency to abandon allies had created resentment. Other chapters viewed them as untrustworthy, more concerned with their own mysterious agenda than with the Imperium's defense. The Lion's diplomacy and the concrete changes he's implementing are slowly rebuilding these bridges. When the Dark Angels commit to an operation now, their allies can trust that commitment will be honored. Perhaps most importantly, the The lion is teaching his sons to forgive themselves. For 10,000 years, they've carried guilt for something most of them had no part in, for a betrayal that occurred before they were even created. The weight of inherited shame has shaped everything about their chapter, often in destructive ways. The lion is showing them that acknowledging past failures doesn't require being enslaved by them, that redemption comes through present action rather than past obsession. The future of the unforgiven. The Dark Angels stand at a crossroads as the 42nd millennium progresses. The return of their Primarch has fundamentally altered their identity and purpose. The question now is what they will become, whether they'll continue to be defined primarily by their secret and their shame, or whether they'll evolve into something new while respecting what came before. The broader group known as the Unforgiven, the successor chapters that descended from the original Dark Angels Legion and that share the secret of the fallen, face similar questions. These chapters have operated semi-independently for millennia, each maintaining its own traditions while coordinating with the others on matters relating to the hunt: the Angels of Absolution, the Angels of Redemption, the Angels of Vengeance. The Consecrators and others have all contributed to the effort to reclaim the First Legion's honor. With the Lion's return, the Unforgiven have gained a central authority figure who can coordinate their efforts in ways that were previously impossible. The Lion has begun holding councils where the leaders of the Unforgiven chapters gather to share intelligence, plan operations, and discuss strategic priorities. These gatherings represent an unprecedented level of cooperation, turning what was essentially a loose alliance into something approaching a unified force. The implications of this increased coordination are significant. The Unforgiven, when working together, represent a substantial military power. They number in the tens of thousands of Space Marines across all their chapters, with fleets and resources to match. If fully mobilized and properly coordinated, they could conduct campaigns on a scale that would rival some of the Imperium's most famous crusades. The Lion is beginning to explore what this coordinated force could accomplish. But this coordination also raises questions about the Unforgiven's relationship with the broader Imperium. As they become more effective and more unified, they also become more noticeable. The Inquisition has always been somewhat suspicious of the Dark Angel's secretive nature, and a more overtly coordinated effort across multiple chapters could draw additional scrutiny. The Lion is aware of this risk and is working to manage it through greater transparency in some areas while maintaining security around the most sensitive information. The question of what to do about the secret itself is also being reconsidered. For 10,000 years, the Dark Angels have operated on the assumption that if the truth about Luther's betrayal became widely known, it would mean their destruction. But is that assumption still valid? The Imperium has changed significantly since the aftermath of the Horus Heresy. The Inquisition has uncovered and dealt with countless instances of corruption and betrayal. The existence of chaos-corrupted Space Marines is no longer shocking news. Would the revelation that some Dark Angels fell to chaos 10 millennia ago really result in the chapter's excommunication? The Lion himself seems to think the secret's power has diminished over time. He's suggested that the shame the Dark Angels carry is disproportionate to the crime, that they've punished themselves far more severely than the Imperium likely would have.
This perspective is controversial within the inner circle, where some believe that any relaxation of security around the secret would be catastrophic. But others are beginning to agree with their Primarch, that the burden of secrecy might be more harmful than the truth it protects. There's also the question of what happens when the hunt finally ends. Assuming that all the fallen are eventually accounted for, either captured, redeemed, or killed, what then? The Dark Angel's entire post-heresy identity has been built around this hunt. Their organizational structure, their traditions, their relationship with successor chapters, all of it exists to support the hunt. If that purpose is fulfilled, what remains? What does it mean to be a Dark Angel when there are no more fallen to pursue? The Lion is already laying groundwork for this future. He's emphasizing the chapter's other traditions, the legacy of the First Legion that has nothing to do with Luther or Caliban's fall. He speaks of the Great Crusade, of battles fought alongside the Emperor, of the Dark Angel's role as humanity's defenders long before the betrayal occurred. He's reconnecting the chapter to a history
that isn't defined by shame, giving them an identity that transcends their darkest moment. The technological and tactical innovations the Lion is introducing will also shape the chapter's future. He's incorporating lessons from his own time and from observing how warfare has evolved in his absence. The Dark Angels are becoming more adaptable, more willing to embrace new methods while respecting old traditions. This balance between innovation and tradition is creating a chapter that's both thoroughly modern and deeply connected to its roots. The integration of the Risen represents another significant change that will influence the future. As these redeemed fallen prove their worth, as they demonstrate that redemption is possible and beneficial, attitudes within the chapter are shifting. The absolute condemnation that characterized how the Dark Angels viewed the fallen for millennia is being replaced by a more nuanced understanding. Some fallen are irredeemable servants of chaos who must be destroyed. Others are warriors who made mistakes and deserve a chance to atone through service. This more measured approach is creating internal debates about how to handle new fallen when they're discovered. Should the default assumption be that they're enemies who must be captured and interrogated? Or should initial contact attempt to determine whether they might be candidates for redemption? Different factions within the inner circle have different views, and the Lion has allowed these debates to continue rather than imposing a single doctrine. He seems to believe that the chapter benefits from having these discussions, from being forced to think through the implications of their choices, rather than simply following established protocols. The Dark Angel's relationship with the Imperium's other institutions is also evolving. The Lion has been working with the Inquisition more openly, sharing intelligence when it serves mutual interests, while maintaining boundaries around the most sensitive information. Some Inquisitors who have worked with the Lion have commented on how different he is from the Dark Angels they've dealt with in the past. He's direct rather than evasive, willing to answer questions rather than deflecting them, confident rather than defensive. This shift in approach is gradually changing how the Inquisition views the chapter. Similarly, cooperation with other Space Marine chapters has improved dramatically.
joint operations that might once have been fraught with tension now proceed smoothly. The lion's presence provides assurance that the Dark Angels won't suddenly abandon their allies, and his reputation ensures that other chapter masters take his commitments seriously. The Dark Angels are regaining the respect they lost through millennia of suspicious behavior. The role of the interrogator chaplains is also being reevaluated. While interrogation and intelligence gathering will always be necessary, the question is whether these functions should continue to be handled primarily by chaplains, or whether they should be distributed among different specialists. The Lion has suggested creating a dedicated intelligence division, similar to the old Fire Wing, that would handle reconnaissance and analysis while leaving spiritual matters more fully in the chaplain's hands. This proposed restructuring is controversial, as it would represent a significant departure from tradition, but it's being seriously discussed at the highest levels of the inner circle. The physical structure of the rock itself is being modified under the Lion's direction. New training facilities are being constructed, old chambers repurposed, and the fortress monastery is being transformed from a monument to secrecy into a more functional headquarters. The torture chambers deep within remain, because some prisoners genuinely require extreme measures, but they're no longer the defining feature of the fortress. The rock is becoming a place defined by what it builds rather than what it hides. Recruitment and training of new Dark Angels is also evolving. The Lion has implemented changes to how aspirants are selected and how they're inducted into the chapter. There's greater emphasis on adaptability and independent thinking, qualities that were sometimes discouraged in the past because they were seen as potential security risks. The Lion wants Dark Angels who can think for themselves, who can make sound decisions when confronting unexpected situations, rather than warriors who simply follow orders without question. The question of succession is also relevant. The Lion is effectively immortal, barring death in battle, and he could lead the Dark Angels for the remainder of the Imperium's existence. But he's also pragmatic enough to recognize that circumstances might someday require others to lead in his absence. He's been mentoring select officers, sharing knowledge and perspective that will allow them to command effectively if he's unavailable. This represents a departure from the previous model, where the Supreme Grand Master was always chosen from within the Inner Circle's existing power structure. The Dark Angels' fleet is also being expanded and modernized. New ships are being constructed, incorporating the latest technology while maintaining the chapter's distinctive aesthetic. The Lion recognizes that naval power will be crucial in the conflicts to come, particularly in a galaxy split by the Great Rift. The ability to project force across vast distances, to respond rapidly to threats wherever they emerge, requires a fleet capable of both independent operation and coordination with larger Imperial naval forces. Perhaps the most significant question about the Dark Angels' future concerns their ultimate purpose. Why does the chapter exist? For 10,000 years, the answer has been to hunt the fallen and redeem the chapter's honor. But if the Lion is successful in shifting the focus away from that obsessive hunt,
what becomes their defining mission? The lion's answer seems to be that the dark angels exist to defend humanity, to serve as the Emperor's finest warriors, to uphold the ideals of the Imperium, even when the Imperium itself falls short of those ideals. This is a profoundly different identity than what the chapter has embraced for millennia. It's aspirational rather than penitential, forward-looking rather than backward-obsessed. It positions the Dark Angels not as a chapter trying to atone for past sins, but as an organization dedicated to building a better future. Whether the chapter can truly embrace this new identity after so long defining themselves by their shame remains to be seen. Conclusion. The Dark Angels stand as one of the most complex and fascinating chapters in all of Warhammer 40,000. They are simultaneously heroes and deeply flawed, warriors of incredible capability, carrying an enormous burden, loyal servants of the Imperium who keep secrets that could be seen as treasonous. Their story is one of honor and shame intertwined so thoroughly that separating them becomes impossible. For 10,000 years, they have fought what they call the unseen war, a conflict that exists in the shadows of the Imperium's more visible battles. They've hunted the fallen across the galaxy, through time and space, driven by a need for redemption that has shaped everything about their chapter. They've organized themselves into circles within circles, with layers of secrets that create hierarchies of knowledge. The Deathwing and Ravenwing have become legendary formations, but their true purpose is known only to those initiated into the inner circle's mysteries. The torture chambers deep within the rock, operated by the interrogator chaplains, represent the darkest aspect of the Dark Angel's character. These are places where the line between justice and vengeance, between necessary interrogation and sadistic torture, becomes blurred. The work conducted there is grim by any measure, but the Dark Angels see it as necessary, as the price that must be paid to extract both information and genuine repentance from those who betrayed everything they stood for. Sci-Fi remains the great enigma, the fallen who evades capture despite millennia of pursuit. His possession of the Lion Sword, his apparent journey toward Terra, his ambiguous actions that sometimes help and sometimes hinder the Imperium. All of these create a mystery that the Dark Angels are desperate to solve. Sci-Fi represents their failure, the one target they cannot capture no matter how many resources they dedicate to the hunt. The Hexagrammaton, the 6 wings of war that once defined the Dark Angel's Legion, has largely been lost to time. Only the Deathwing and Ravenwing survived in recognizable form, while the Dreadwing, Stormwing, Ironwing, and Firewing faded into history, but their legacy persists in the chapter's culture, in the emphasis on versatility and the belief that a true dark angel should master multiple forms of warfare. The return of Lion L. Johnson has been transformative. The Primarch has brought clarity and purpose to a chapter that had become consumed by its secret. He's introduced the concept of the Risen, fallen who have been redeemed and brought back into service. He's reorganized how the hunt is conducted, making it more efficient while reducing its impact on the chapter's other duties. And he's begun the long process of helping his sons forgive themselves, of teaching them that they can honor the past without being enslaved by it. The future of the Dark Angels and the broader Unforgiven remains uncertain. Will they continue to be defined primarily by their secret and their hunt? Or will they evolve into something new? Will the truth about Luther's betrayal eventually come out? And if so, will the consequences be as catastrophic as they've always feared? Will Cypher finally be captured? And will his secrets reshape their understanding of their own history? These questions don't have clear answers, and perhaps that's appropriate. The Dark Angels have always operated in ambiguity, in the space between light and shadow. What is clear is that the Dark Angels represent something fundamental about Warhammer 40,000's setting. They show how even the most noble warriors can be corrupted, how shame and guilt can shape an organization for millennia, how the pursuit of redemption can become its own form of obsession. They demonstrate that in a universe of moral grays, even the Imperium's heroes carry darkness within them. The Dark Angels are tragic figures in the classical sense. They're brought low not by external enemies, but by internal betrayal, by the actions of those they trusted most. They spend millennia trying to redeem themselves for sins that most of them had no part in committing. They sacrifice everything: their relationships with other chapters, their reputation for reliability, even their sanity in some cases, in pursuit of a redemption that may be impossible to achieve. Yet, they're also genuinely heroic. They fight the Imperium's enemies with skill and dedication that few can match. They've saved countless worlds, defeated threats that would have consumed entire sectors, and served the Emperor faithfully despite carrying a burden that would have broken lesser warriors. Their shame doesn't negate their achievements. It exists alongside their heroism, complicating their story but not invalidating it. The unseen war that the Dark Angels fight is ultimately a war against themselves, against their own past and the shame it represents. It's a war that can't be won through military victory alone, because the enemy is internal. The fallen can all be captured or killed, but as long as the Dark Angels define themselves by that betrayal, as long as they allow shame to be their primary motivation, the war continues. Lion L. Johnson understands this in ways his sons are still learning. He knows that true redemption doesn't come from erasing the evidence of failure, but from building something better despite that failure. He's teaching the Dark Angels to be more than their shame, to reclaim the proud identity of the First Legion while acknowledging, rather than hiding, the dark chapter in their history. The story of the Dark Angels is far from over. The galaxy burns with war on every front. The Great Rift splits the Imperium in half. Chaos pours forth from the Eye of Terror with renewed vigor. Xenos threats multiply faster than they can be countered. In this apocalyptic setting, the Dark Angels will continue to fight, will continue to hunt, will continue to seek the redemption that has eluded them for 10,000 years. They'll do so with their Primarch leading them, with the Deathwing and Ravenwing at the forefront, with the Interrogator chaplains working in the shadows, and with the Inner Circle maintaining their vigilance. They'll coordinate with their successor chapters, the Unforgiven, standing together against the darkness. And perhaps, someday, they'll achieve the redemption they seek. Or they'll learn that redemption was something they already possessed, but couldn't recognize because shame blinded them to it. The Dark Angels are the First Legion, and that means something beyond mere chronological ordering. They were the prototype, the proof of concept, the template from which all other Space Marines would follow. They carry that legacy even now, 10,000 years after their founding. They are simultaneously the Imperium's most dedicated servants and its most secretive. They are the Emperor's finest warriors, and they are flawed, broken by betrayal but refusing to surrender. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Dark Angels fight on. They hunt the fallen. They defend humanity. They carry their burden with grim determination. They are the Knights of Caliban, the First Legion, the Unforgiven. And they will never stop seeking redemption, no matter how many millennia it takes, no matter what price must be paid. This has been our journey into the depths of the Dark Angels' history, their organization, their secrets, and their unseen war. From the forests of Caliban to the chambers of the rock, from the wings of the Hexagrammaton to the hunts of the Deathwing and Ravenwing, from the mystery of Cypher to the return of the Lion himself, we've explored what makes this chapter so compelling and so tragic. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the Dark Angels and their secret history, please consider hitting that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content exploring the hidden corners of science fiction's greatest universes. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss future explorations of the lore that makes these settings so rich and fascinating. The Dark Angels remind us that even in universes of absolute moral clarity, where good and evil battle across the stars, the reality is always more complex. Heroes can carry shame. Loyalty can coexist with terrible secrets. the pursuit of redemption can become its own form of corruption. These are warriors who embody contradiction, and perhaps that's what makes them so enduringly fascinating. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free of the shadows that haunt the First Legion. The Dark Angels watch in those shadows, hunting ghosts, seeking redemption, fighting their unseen war. They are the Emperor's Dark Angels, and they will never surrender, never forget, and never forgive themselves for the betrayal that happened 10,000 years ago on a world called Caliban. Good night.